The guns came out before anyone had time to scream. One moment, the Silver Pine Diner was warm and ordinary coffee cups steaming, forks scraping plates, a little girl laughing at something her mother said. The next moment, the front door exploded inward, and four armed men in black moved through the room like they owned it, like they had planned every single second of what was about to happen. Everyone froze. Everyone panicked. Everyone except one man in the corner, Booth, a quiet single father named Grant Halden, who simply set down his coffee cup, looked at his daughter, and began to count the guns. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because this channel delivers stories that will grab you by the collar and refuse to let go. Drop your city or country in the comments below so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled. And if you're still watching at the very end, hit that like button and tell me what you thought. Let's get into it. You are not going to want to step away. The town of Millhaven, Colorado, sat about 40 miles east of nowhere useful. That was genuinely one of the reasons Grant Halden had chosen it. The mountain air, not the property taxes, not the school ratings, though he had studied all three in detail before signing a lease on the small two-bedroom house on Birchwood Lane. What had sold him on Millhaven was the simple, beautiful fact that nothing much happened there. 6 years in, nothing much still happened. And Grant had started to believe that maybe, if a man was careful enough and quiet enough for long enough, he could actually outrun the things he used to be. He was thinking about none of this on the night of December 14th. What he was thinking about, if his brain was producing thoughts at all beyond low-grade exhaustion, was whether the Silver Pine Diner still made their sweet potato fries on Friday nights, and whether Lily would eat them or just pick at them and announce that they tasted wrong. Lily was 8 years old and had opinions about potatoes that she expressed with the conviction of a federal prosecutor. Dad. She was already sliding into the booth before he had even fully opened the diner door, her red winter coat half unzipped, despite the fact that it was 22 degrees outside. Can I get hot chocolate? You can get water, Dad. You can get apple juice. She dropped into the seat and crossed her arms. That is not hot chocolate. No, he agreed, settling across from her. It is not. The Silver Pine Diner had not changed much in the 6 years Grant had been coming in. Same pine-paneled walls with the amateur landscape paintings that local artists had donated in exchange for free pie. Same ancient jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked since 2019, but that nobody seemed to want to remove. Same red vinyl booths patched with electrical tape in 3 or 4 places. Same laminated menus with the faded photographs of food that had looked considerably better in 1998 when the photos were taken. Grant liked it for those reasons. Constancy, continuity, the kind of place where the waitress knew your usual order before you sat down. Evening, Grant. That was Diane, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up on her head, refilling the coffee of the man 2 booths over without being asked. The usual for you? And I suppose the princess wants hot chocolate. Lily looked at her father with the expression of someone who had just received unexpected legal support. Apple juice, Grant said. Lily's expression collapsed. Diane, she said, he is being unreasonable. He is being a father, Diane said cheerfully, already writing on her pad. Apple juice it is. Sweet potato fries, please, Grant said. They taste wrong, Lily said. They taste like sweet potatoes, Grant said. Is what I said. Diane left with the kind of practiced amusement of someone who had witnessed approximately 4,000 versions of this exact exchange. Grant let himself settle back into the booth. The diner was moderately busy for a Friday, maybe 18. 20 people spread across the tables and counter stools. A couple of trucksers at the far end. A family with 3 young kids making a genuine mess of a shared basket of onion rings. An older man reading a newspaper with the focused intensity of someone who had decided that the news was more important than anything else on offer. In the large corner booth near the rear, the one Grant always avoided, because it sat with its back to the room, was a woman he had never seen before and a child approximately Lily's age. He clocked them, the way he clocked everyone when he first walked in. It was not something chose to do. It was something that happened so, before choosing, was involved a habit so old and so deep that trying to stop it would have been like trying to stop blinking. He noted the woman, late 20s or 30, dark hair pulled back practically. Very good coat that was trying not to look expensive and failing. The child beside her, 7, maybe 8, dark curls, small serious face, reading something on a tablet, with the kind of absorbed concentration that reminded Grant of Lily doing math. There was a man at the edge of the table who was not eating. He was sit at a slight angle to the booth. He was sitting at a slight angle untouched, scanning the room every 45 seconds with the systematic patience of someone who had been trained to do it. Security, private, professional, experienced. Someone was paying good money for that man to sit in a Colorado diner on a Friday night. Grant looked away and looked at his daughter. "Can I have your phone?" Lily asked. "Do you have your book?" She produced it from her coat pocket with the speed of someone who had anticipated this question. It was a paperback about a girl who could talk to horses. She had read it 3 times already. She opened it to a dog-eared page and immediately disappeared into it. Grant wrapped his hands around his coffee cup and let the warmth of the diner settle over him. The woman's name, he would learn it later, was Vivienne Ashford, 30 years old, founder and CEO of Ashford Technologies, which operated in a field specific enough and profitable enough that several governments had taken active interest in what she was building. She had a company worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 billion, a reputation for working 18-hour days, and a daughter named Sophie whom she saw considerably less than she intended to. Tonight had been an attempt to fix that. She had a meeting in Denver the following morning, had driven out the previous day to spend 2 nights in a rented mountain cabin with Sophie. Yes, he'd intervened, and had stopped at the Silver Pine Diner because Sophie had pointed at the sign from the car and said that she liked the pine tree on the logo. They had been ordering burgers. Sophie had been explaining, in serious and careful detail, a book she was reading about deep-sea fish, and Vivienne had been doing something she almost never managed to do anymore, listening, without also answering an email on her phone. Her security detail, a former law enforcement officer named Dennis Hartley, who had worked for her for 2 years, was watching the room with the professional patience of a man who had decided that the most dangerous thing in this particular diner was the onion rings. He revised that opinion at approximately 7:43 p. when the front door of the Silver Pine Diner opened and 4 men walked in. Grant heard the door and looked up. Because doors opening was unusual. Because of the way they opened it, controlled, deliberate, the second man already moving left before the first man had cleared the threshold. Small thing, probably invisible to everyone else in the room. To Grant, it was the equivalent of an alarm going off. He set his coffee cup down. He did it quietly, so Lily wouldn't notice. She was deep in her book, bottom lip slightly tucked, finger moving along the page. He counted. 4 men, black clothing, nothing tactical, jeans, jackets, nothing that would have looked out of place on a cold Colorado night. Their hands were wrong. But their hands were wrong. The way they held their arms slightly away from their bodies were not Fandal speaking or pointing. You seen, these were not 4 friends arriving for dinner. Breathed slowly and looked at the nearest exits. Front door, already compromised. Kitchen door at the rear, 20 feet behind him. Emergency exit on the west wall beside the jukebox, alarmed, slow. Window booths, visible from the parking lot. He looked at Lily. She turned a page. She had not looked up. The man at the front of the group reached into his jacket. Body moves. The diner exploded. Literally, but the noise was the kind that hit like a physical force. Screaming, chairs scraping. The family with the 3 kids all lurching and colliding. The trucker at the far counter, standing up and immediately freezing when the second gunman swung toward him. Plates crashed. Someone knocked over a coffee cup, and the sound of it shattering was somehow the loudest thing in the room. Grant had already moved. Not dramatically. Not in the way that would later be described in police reports as heroic. What he did in the 2 seconds between the first shout and the first gun being clearly visible was pull Lily down out of the booth and underneath the table in a single motion, absorbing most of the impact himself so she didn't hit the floor hard. Quiet. He said it right against her ear, barely a breath. Do not make a sound. Do not move. I need you to stay exactly here. She looked at him. She was frightened. Her eyes were wide. Her whole body had gone rigid, but she was looking at him, not at the gunman, which was what he needed. He held her gaze for 1 second. Trust me, he said. Stay here. She nodded once, And Grant very slowly pressed himself back against the underside of the booth and began to think. The man who had shouted was standing near the center of the diner now, and Grant had a portfolio of him through the gap between the booth seat and the floor. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a gray jacket. He was not pointing his weapon randomly. He was sweeping it systematically across the room with the controlled patience of someone running a procedure. Street muscle. Someone who knew what he was doing. The other three had fanned to cover the exits. One near the front door. One near the kitchen. One moving toward the counter, gathering the customers who were pressed against it with their hands up. Professional. Coordinated. This was not a robbery. Grant studied the man at the center and then tracked his gaze. Where was he looking? Not at the cash register. Not at the terrified trucker or the crying children. He was looking toward the rear of the diner. Toward the corner booth. Grant looked at the corner booth. The security man, Dennis, had risen from his seat the moment the shouting started and had his hand inside his jacket and then stopped and very slowly raised both hands, because the man near the kitchen had anticipated him and was already 6 feet away with the gun pointed at his chest. Hand out of the jacket, the gunman said. Slowly. Dennis complied. He was a professional too, and he understood the math. One man with a drawn weapon versus one man trying to reach an undrawn weapon across 6 feet of distance. He put his hands up. Good, the gunman said. Then he hit Dennis across the side of the head with enough force that Dennis went down into the booth, unconscious, head lolling against the seat. Vivienne made a sound that was not quite a scream, more like a sharp, involuntary intake of breath, compressed into a single syllable. She pulled Sophie against her immediately, and Sophie, and this was the detail that stuck with Grant, did not cry. She pressed her face into her mother's shoulder and held on, and she was shaking, but she was quiet. Brave kid, Grant thought, scared out of her mind and still quiet. The leader moved toward the rear booth. He stopped at the table, and when he looked down at Vivienne Ashford, there was nothing in his expression that resembled human warmth. It was a business expression, the expression of someone completing a task. Ashford, he said, my name doesn't matter. What matters is that you cooperate. What do you want? Her voice was tighter than she probably wanted it to be. She was working to keep it even. We want the girl, he said. The silence that followed lasted about 1 second and felt considerably longer. Vivienne said. The word came out of her so fast and so absolutely that several of the other hostages flinched. Wasn't a negotiation, the man said. He nodded to one of his people. Take her. Grant was counting. He did it, systematically, the way he had been trained to do it in circumstances that were considerably more extreme than a diner in Colorado. 4 gunmen, 3 visible from his current position, 1 presumably still at the front door. The leader and 1 other near the rear booth. 1 at the counter covering the hostages. 1 at the front. He did not have a weapon. He had his keys, a pocket knife with a 2-inch blade that he carried out of pure habit, and the booth table above him. He had the layout of the diner, which he had memorized years ago, without consciously deciding to. He had the knowledge that the kitchen door swung inward on the left. He also had the clear and uncomplicated understanding that if that child was taken out of this building, the probability of finding her alive diminished rapidly with every hour she was gone. He had known that kind of math for a long time. What he wanted, what he had wanted every day for the past 6 years, was to not be the person who knew that kind of math anymore. He wanted to be the quiet guy in the corner booth with the sweet potato fries and the daughter who had opinions about potatoes. Nope. He'd intervened. He pressed his back against the booth and listened to a 7-year-old girl start to cry as someone tried to pull her away from her mother. A small hand found his arm in the darkness under the table. He looked at Lily. She was not supposed to be looking at anything he had told her to keep her face down, but she had shifted just enough to look at him. And her expression, in the dim light from the floor, was not the expression of a frightened child. It was something older than that. Something that looked, in a way that made his chest ache, like his own face. She looked toward the sound of the crying girl. She looked back at him. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Grant closed his eyes for 1 second. He opened them, looked at his daughter, and mouthed, "Stay here. Do not move. I will come back." Then he began to move. He did it low and slow, sliding out from under the booth on the kitchen side, away from the line of sight of the man at the counter. The couple in the booth ahead of him, a man in his 60s and a woman who might have been his wife, both pressed flat against the seat, stared at him with an expression of collective terror as he materialized from under the table. Grant put one finger to his lips. He pointed to the couple, then to the floor, then made a flat palm gesture. "Stay down. Stay flat." The man stared at him. Then, slowly, he nodded. Grant moved toward the kitchen door. He kept his body below the sightline of the booth backs, using the layout of the room that he had mapped without thinking 6 years of Friday nights. The sound of the leader's voice continued from the rear of the diner. He was speaking to Vivienne, and she was responding. And her responses were getting progressively less cooperative, which was costing her something and buying Grant something, and he was grateful to her without ever having met her. He reached the kitchen door and paused with his back against it. Yes, and through the small circular window he could see the kitchen. 2 line cooks pressed against the far wall, a teenage dishwasher sitting on the floor with his arms around his knees, and Diane, who had apparently retreated during the initial chaos, and was now standing beside the grill with a cast iron skillet in her hands, an expression of deep personal offense on her face. Grant pushed the door open 1 inch, made eye contact with Diane through the gap, and shook his head very slightly. She looked at the skillet. She looked at him. She set the skillet down. He slipped through the door. "Where did the guy from one of the line cooks?" began in a whisper. "Quiet," Grant said softly. He was already studying the kitchen. "Back door, chain lock, deadbolt, opened outward. 18 inches of clearance between the prep tables and the door. He could get 3 people through at a time if he moved them fast." He looked at Diane. "How many people are back here?" "4 of us," she said. Her voice was steady. He revised his estimate of her upward. "That door go to the alley?" "Yes. Any cameras back there?" "Do you know?" "Dumpsters. Recycling." He nodded. I'm going to get some of the people from out there in here, and then I'm going to move everyone through this door. You understand?" She looked at him with the expression of someone updating their understanding of a situation rapidly. "Who are you?" "Nobody important," Grant said. "Just somebody who doesn't want anyone to get hurt tonight. You gonna help me?" She looked at him for 1 more second. "Tell me what to do," she said. He went back through the kitchen door 3 times. Each time he identified a pair of hostages, prioritizing the family with the young children. Then the older couple, 2 women from the counter, and moved them along the floor to the kitchen, with a minimum of sound and a maximum of controlled speed. It was not elegant. The mother of the 3 children bumped a chair, and Grant froze for 2 full seconds, watching through the booth gap as the gunman at the counter turned toward the sound. Then something in the rear of the diner, Vivienne's voice, rising with deliberate heat, drew the man's attention back, and Grant released the breath he had been holding and continued moving. He did not know if she was doing it on purpose. He suspected she was. By the time he had cleared the 3rd group, there were 9 people in the kitchen, and the gunman at the counter was beginning to look restless and aware that the room had gotten quieter than it should have been. Grant needed to move now. He went back to the dining room 1 more time, and this time he went toward the rear. Dettinson amused, toward the sound of Sophie crying and Vivienne's voice, which had gone from heated to something quieter and more desperate, which meant things were progressing in a direction Grant could not allow. He moved along the wall, using the line of booths as cover. The leader was pulling Sophie out of the booth. Now the girl was fighting him with the wordless, furious determination of a child who has decided that she is not going anywhere. Legs kicking. Yes, fingers gripping the seat back, and Vivienne had grabbed the man's arm, and he had turned and shoved her backward into Dennis' unconscious body with enough force that she went down and didn't immediately get up. Yes, he'd intervened. The gunman at the back had his weapon up and was covering the remaining 2 or 3 hostages who hadn't made it to the kitchen. He was facing away from Grant, 3 steps. Grant covered them quickly and quietly and put the man down with the clean efficiency of someone who had done this kind of thing in places considerably darker and more dangerous than a Colorado diner. The man's weapon hit the floor. Grant caught it before it bounced and had it in his hands and was moving toward the leader before the sound of the man hitting the floor had finished echoing. "Stop," Grant said. The leader stopped. He still had one hand on Sophie's arm. He turned slowly and looked at Grant. and his expression did the thing that expressions do when someone recalculates a situation rapidly: a flicker, a tightening, a reassessment. "Let her go," Grant said. The leader looked at Grant the way a chess player looks at a piece that has just appeared on the board from somewhere unexpected. He was thinking, calculating, measuring. "Who are you?" he said. "Someone you don't want to test," Grant said. There was a pause that lasted about 4 seconds and felt considerably longer. The leader released Sophie's arm. She ran. Grant pointed. "Kitchen. Go through the door and tell the lady named Diane I said go now." Sophie ran without looking back. She was crying, but she was running hard, and Grant heard the kitchen door swing open and closed behind her. The leader looked at Grant. His expression had settled into something cold and flat and evaluating. "There are still 3 of my men in this building," he said. "2, Grant said, "and the one at the door." The leader blinked. "Just once. That was all. I suggest," Grant said, "that you sit down and wait for the police." From outside the diner, very faintly, came the sound of sirens. It did not go as clean as that. Nothing did. That was the thing about situations like this, that movies got entirely wrong: the clean ending, the clear moment where it was over. Real situations had loose edges. Real situations had the man at the counter, suddenly aware that something had gone wrong, and coming toward the rear of the diner at a run. Real situations had the leader deciding, in the half-second that Grant's eyes tracked to the sound of running feet, that the odds had shifted enough to make a move worth attempting. Grant was already moving when the leader lunged. What happened in the next 40 seconds was not something Grant would remember in sequence. Never worked that way. What he remembered afterward was fragments: the leader's jacket in his hands, the edge of a booth corner against his ribs, the gunman from the counter stopping dead when he came through the door and found 2 men on the floor instead of 1. The sound of Vivienne Ashford from somewhere behind him saying something that was not a complete sentence but was emphatic. The sound from outside of tires on gravel, multiple vehicles, radio static. The surviving leader and the counter gunman looked at each other. Grant was between them and the exits. "It's done," Grant said. He was breathing harder than he wanted to be. His ribs were going to have opinions about tonight in the morning. "Both of you, sit down." They sat down. Outside, the red and blue lights began to paint the diner windows in slow rotating color. Grant found Lily exactly where he had left her. She was still under the table, exactly as he had told her, knees pulled to her chest, back against the booth, book in her hands. She had not moved. She had not made a sound. He'd intervened. She had done exactly what he asked, and the sight of her small and fierce and completely contained in that way was the thing that finally cracked something loose in his chest that had been wound tight since the moment the door opened. He crouched down in front of her. "Hey," he said. She looked at him. She was pale. Her hands were shaking slightly around the book, but her chin was up. "Is the girl okay?" she said. "She's okay," Grant said. "Everyone's okay," Lily exhaled. It was a long, complicated exhale for an 8-year-old. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at an expression he couldn't quite name. "I knew you'd fix it," she said. He didn't answer that. What to say to it? He just held out his hand, and she took it, and he helped her out from under the booth and held her against his chest for a moment, one arm around her, the way he used to hold her when she was small enough that it covered most of her, and she let him, which she usually didn't anymore, because she was 8 and had opinions about that sort of thing too. Outside, the first tactical vehicles were pulling into the parking lot. Grant looked at the diner around him, the overturned chairs, the shattered coffee cup, the pine-paneled walls that had seen more on this Friday night than they were ever built to see, and then he looked at his daughter, and he took a slow breath of coffee-scented air. Then he gently set her back on her feet, straightened up, and went to let the police in. The first officer through the door was young mid-20s, probably, with the kind of wide-eyed, controlled tension that meant he'd trained for this situation, but hadn't lived it yet. He came in low with his weapon up and swept the room in the way they teach at the academy, and Grant watched him from across the diner and thought, "Good form, solid instincts, but he's checking the wrong corner first." Grant had his hands up before the second officer came through, because anyone had told him to, because he understood what it looked like from the outside, to walk into a room where 2 men were sitting on the floor and a third man was standing over them with a firearm that did not belong to him. He understood it very specifically. I'm setting this down, Grant said, keeping his voice level and his movements deliberate. He crouched and placed the weapon on the floor beside his boot. I'm not a threat. The two men sitting down are. The man by the kitchen door is also one of them. There's a fourth at the front entrance. I don't know his current status. The young officer stared at him. Sir, I need you to step back, Grant said. He stepped back. He kept his hands visible. Lily was standing 3 feet behind him, and she had the particular expression of a child who has decided to be extremely cooperative with authority figures because she has assessed the situation and determined that this is the correct approach. She had her hands at her sides and her books under one arm, and she was looking at the officers with the polite attentiveness of someone waiting for a school bus. The second officer, older, Sergeant Stripes, a face that had seen enough to know the difference between a threat and a man who had just handled one, looked at Grant, looked at the two men on the floor, looked at Lily, and made a rapid calculation. You're the one who called it in? The sergeant said. Diane called it in, Grant said. From the kitchen. She's got 9 civilians back there, including a child who was the primary target. Everyone is physically okay. The sergeant looked at him for a moment longer. And who are you?
I live on Birchwood Lane.
I was having dinner. Another pause. The sergeant looked around the room at the overturned furniture, the shattered crockery, the two men sitting on the floor, with the resigned expressions of people who understood their evening, had concluded in the worst possible way, and then back at Grant. Stay right here, the sergeant said. Don't go anywhere. I wasn't planning to, Grant said. He turned around and looked at Lily. She was still holding her book. No, she had moved approximately 4 inches closer to him while he wasn't watching, close enough that her shoulder was nearly touching his arm. You okay? He asked quietly. Yes, she said. Then my apple juice is probably warm now. Grant looked at the overturned table. The apple juice was on the floor. Probably, he agreed. She considered this. That's okay, she said. I didn't really want it anyway. The next hour was the kind of controlled chaos that looked, from inside it, like very little was being controlled at all. Units arrived. Then a tactical team that had driven 40 minutes from the county seat, moving fast enough that they arrived with the barely contained energy of people who had geared up for a situation that had already resolved itself. Shortly after, a pair of plainclothes officers who introduced themselves as detectives and had the particular quality of stillness that Grant recognized as people who had learned to think fast and show nothing. The surviving members of the assault team, 3 of the 4, yes, he'd intervened. The one Grant had put down near the kitchen door would be spending the night in the county hospital. Separated Usher's shoulder and a cracked collarbone were separated and walked out to waiting vehicles. The leader went last.
As they walked past Grant,
he turned his head and looked directly at him, and the expression on his face was not anger. It was something more considered than that. Something that said, I will want to know who you are. Grant looked back at him without expression. The detective's name was Elena Reyes, compact and sharp-eyed, with a notepad she barely used, and a habit of asking questions while looking at everything except the person she was asking them to. Walk me through it, she said. Grant walked her through it. He kept it simple and sequential. He left out nothing material and volunteered nothing extra. He described what he had seen, what he had assessed, and what he had done, in the flat and factual manner of someone giving a report. He used the word neutralized once, caught himself, and replaced it with put down. Old habits. Reyes wrote nothing, looked at the middle distance, and listened to all of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You moved 9 people out of the dining room without the gunman noticing, she said. Correct. And then went back in. Correct. And then went into the kitchen, retrieved the child, sent her through, and then went back into the dining area again. Yes, she looked at him then. Mr. Halden, what do you do for work? I work for an agricultural supply company, Grant said. I do logistics coordination. I work remotely. Reyes looked at him. Logistics coordination. Yes. She made a sound that was not quite a word and went back to looking at the middle distance. Any prior military service. He had known it was coming. He'd been waiting for it since he gave his first answer. I served, he said, a while back. Branch? Navy. She nodded, wrote something minimal on the pad. Thank you, Mr. Halden. We'll need a formal statement probably tomorrow if that works. I'd appreciate it if you stayed available. Of course, he said. She started to turn away, then paused. The woman, Ms. Ashford. She's been asking about you. Grant said nothing. She's in the back with her daughter. EMTs checked both of them out. They're physically fine. Reyes paused. To see them? No, Grant said. Then, because that came out more flatly than he intended, I think she probably needs some time. With her daughter. Is intervened. Reyes studied him for a moment with the neutral professional expression of someone who was noting things but not yet deciding what they meant. "'Kay," she said and walked away. They let him take Lily home at around 10:30. Yes, he'd intervened. One of the uniformed officers, the young one with the good form, offered to drive them, and Grant thanked him and declined and walked to his truck in the parking lot, which had been partially cordoned off, but not fully blocked. The truck was cold, in the way that vehicles get cold in Colorado in December, when they've been sitting for 3 hours, and it took 2 attempts to start the heater. Yes, Lily sat in the passenger seat with her seatbelt on and her book in her lap, and she didn't say anything for the first few minutes of the drive, which was not like her. She usually had a running commentary on most things, including the dark and the temperature and the quality of the stars, and whatever she had most recently read. Grant let the silence sit. He watched the road. The heater made its slow progress toward something resembling warmth. "Dad," she said, when they were about 5 minutes from home. "Were you scared?" He thought about this for a moment. He could give her the easy answer, the one designed to reassure, the version where everything had been under control, and he had not at any single moment felt the cold specific fear that came from knowing that his daughter was under a booth table in a room with armed men. He could give her that. "Yes," he said. She processed this. "Because of me mostly," he said. "Yes." She looked out the window. "I was scared too," she said. "But I stayed like you said. You did good." Another silence. Then that little girl. "Sophie." "Yeah." She was really scared. Lily said it with the gravity of someone identifying something important. "I could hear her crying, I know. But she was quiet for a long time first," Lily said, "before she cried. That takes a lot." Grant looked at the road ahead. "Yeah," he said. "It does." He didn't say anything else, because there wasn't much to add to that, and because Lily had a way of seeing people clearly that sometimes left him without a response. She got it from her mother, that quality. No, the ability to look at someone and notice the true thing about them, anything else. He thought about that and kept driving, and by the time they pulled into the driveway on Birchwood Lane, Lily was asleep against the window with her book still in her hands. He didn't sleep. He hadn't expected to. He sat at the kitchen table after Lily was in bed and drank 2 cups of coffee that he didn't need and looked at the wall and ran through the evening the way he always ran through operations, afterward systematically, looking for the moments where it could have gone differently, where he had been slow or wrong or lucky in a way that could not be counted on. The leader had known her name, Vivienne Ashford. He had walked into that diner knowing exactly who he was looking for, which meant this was not opportunistic. Someone had known where she was going to be on that particular Friday night. Someone had arranged it. That was not Grant's problem, technically. Was a problem for the police and for whatever private security infrastructure a $4 billion company maintained when it wasn't being knocked unconscious in Colorado diners. He told himself that. He refilled the coffee cup and told himself that again, and it was more convincing the second time, which he didn't entirely trust. At some point, he fell asleep at the table and woke up to Lily standing beside him in her pajamas, patting his shoulder with the concerned efficiency of someone who has found a parent in an inadvisable position. "Your neck is going to hurt." "It already does," he said. "You should have gone to bed." "I know. Do you want toast?" He looked at her. She was already moving toward the bread box, with the air of someone who has made a decision. This was something she did when she was worried she made food. She had been doing it since she was 6, when she'd learned to use the toaster, and it was one of the things about her that Grant found alternately heartbreaking and extraordinary. "Yeah," he said. "Toast sounds good." She made it with an amount of butter that was probably not what their doctor would recommend, and set it in front of him with a glass of orange juice. Then she sat across from him and watched him eat it with the attentive concern of a much older person. "School today," Grant said. "I know. You okay to go?" She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. I think so, she said. Mrs. Patterson is doing the science fair judging today, and I want to see if his baking soda volcano actually works, because I do not think his calculations were correct. What were his calculations? He used too much baking soda. It's going to overflow. Maybe that's what he wanted. Lily looked at him with an expression of scientific skepticism. Is not science, she said. That is making a mess. Grant ate his toast and felt, against all reasonable expectation, something close to normal. The formal statement took most of the following morning. Detective Rikis ran it herself with a younger partner who typed and mostly stayed quiet. It intervened. They did it at the county police department, in a room that smelled like burnt coffee and carpet that needed replacing. Grant sat first from them and answered everything they asked and kept his answers to the shape of what was and not larger. Reyes was careful. She went back over certain sections, twice the part where he had moved the hostages, the part where he had taken the weapon. She asked about his Navy service again, in more detail this time. He told her what was publicly accessible. He was in for 8 years. He separated at 30. He moved to Millhaven to raise his daughter. What was your rating, she asked. Special warfare operator, he said, which was accurate and incomplete. She wrote it down. Her expression did not change. The man you put down near the kitchen door, she said. Separated shoulder, cracked collarbone, 3 cracked ribs. That's a lot of damage for someone who was surprised. He had a weapon, Grant said. I needed him incapacitated quickly. Efficiently, Reyes said. Yes, she looked at him. Mr. Halden, I've been doing this for 17 years. What happened in that diner last night, the way it was handled, I want to be straight with you, was not civilian behavior. Grant said nothing. I'm not accusing you of anything, she said. I'm just naming what I see. What you did in there saved lives. Multiple lives. Probably including a child who would have been based on what we're now understanding about who these people were and what they wanted in a very bad situation. She paused. I'm not going to push on the parts you don't want to give me. We have enough for the prosecution, and your statement is solid. I just want you to know that I see it. Grant nodded once. Is there anything you want to add? She said. Anything you think we should know? The leader, Grant said. He knew her name before he walked in. He knew she was going to be there. That's an intelligence problem, not just a security problem. Reyes nodded slowly. We're aware of that. I know it's not my business, Grant said. I didn't say that, Reyes said. He drove home in the gray December afternoon, and the mountains on the horizon sat under a low shelf of cloud that made them look heavier than usual, and he turned the radio on and left it on a station that was playing old country music, and he did not think about any of it for the 20 minutes it took to get back to Birchwood Lane. He was at the kitchen table 2 days later, working through a logistics spreadsheet that was about as interesting as it sounds, when his phone rang. Unknown number, Colorado area code, but not one he recognized. He picked up Mr. Halden, a woman's voice, careful and precise, like someone who was choosing each word before she let it leave her mouth. This is Vivienne Ashford. I got your number from Detective Reyes. I hope that's okay. He set his coffee cup down. It's okay. A pause. He heard her exhale, not dramatically. Just a small release of breath that sounds like someone who had been holding something. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you since Saturday night. I've started this call about 4 times. You don't have to say anything, Grant said. I don't have to, she said. I'm not calling because I feel obligated. I'm calling because I wanted to. Another brief pause. How is your daughter? The question surprised him slightly, which meant his guard was less up than it should have been. She's fine. She went to school Monday, judged someone's science fair project. Harshly, accurately, he said. He heard something that was almost a laugh short, involuntary, the kind that escapes before you decide to make it. She's doing better than I expected. She's talking about it, which the pediatrician says is good. She told me about the man who told her to run to the kitchen. She described you. What did she say? She said you were calm, Vivienne said. She said that was the thing she remembered. That you weren't scared. Grant looked at the spreadsheet. I was scared, he said. But you didn't show it. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. Exactly. It had a quality to it Two people on either end of a phone who were in the early stages of understanding that they had been through something together without having properly met. "I want to thank you," she said. "In person, I mean. If that's something you'd be open to. You don't need to do that," she said with a firmness that suggested she was done hearing that particular response. "I'm going to be in Millhaven on Thursday. I'm coming back to deal with some things related to what happened. I'd like to buy you and your daughter dinner. Or coffee. Whatever's comfortable." He was quiet for a moment. The spreadsheet was still open in front of him. He had 37 line items to reconcile before Friday. Lily's school pickup at 3:15. He had a dentist appointment for her on Thursday morning that he'd rescheduled twice already and could not reschedule again. "The Silver Pine is going to be closed," he said. "I know. A beat. There's a place called Hanover's on Route 6. Sophie wants waffles." Grant picked up his coffee cup. "Lily likes waffles," he said. Vivienne said. "Sophie told me." He went still for a second. They talked on Saturday night, while the police were there. "Your daughter found Sophie sitting by herself near the kitchen and sat down next to her. She didn't say much, apparently. She just sat there." Sophie said it helped. Her voice had shifted slightly, something less careful, something that sounded like a person instead of a CEO. "Your daughter is remarkable." Grant looked at the ceiling. He thought about Lily, at 8 years old, walking over to a terrified stranger and sitting down beside her without being asked. He thought about how she'd found his hand in the dark under the booth and hadn't said a word. Just let him know she was there. "Yeah," he said. "She is." "Thursday," Vivienne said. "Hanover's, 6 o'clock. You don't have to stay long." He thought about all the reasons it was a complicated idea. He thought about the leader's expression as they walked him out of the diner, that considering cataloging look. He thought about Reyes saying, "This is an intelligence problem, not just a security problem." 6 o'clock, he said. Thursday arrived gray and cold, with a wind off the mountains that had real intent behind it. Lily asked four times the drive to Hanover's why they were going, and Grant told her the truth, that the woman from the diner wanted to thank them, and that her daughter would be there. "Sophie," Lily said. "Right, she's 7, I think so." "I don't usually have a lot to say to 7-year-olds, Lily said, with the world-weary honesties of someone who has recently survived a traumatic event and has done significant reassessment of priorities. "She likes deep-sea fish," Grant said. Lily looked at him with slightly elevated interest. "What kind?" "I don't know. You'll have to ask her." Lily looked out the window. "Okay," she said, with the tone of someone accepting a professional assignment. Hanover's was warm and smelled like maple syrup, and had the kind of lighting that was orange enough to feel like a kitchen rather than a restaurant, which Grant appreciated. Vivienne and Sophie were already there at a corner table near the window, and Sophie was standing on her chair looking out at the parking lot, and when Lily walked in, she pointed. "That's her," Sophie announced at a volume calibrated for a larger space. Vivienne stood up from the table. She was different in this light than she had been in the diner. The good coat was still there, still trying not to look expensive, but she was less composed than the woman Grant had briefly catalogued across the dining room on Friday night. Tiredness around her eyes, and something in the way she held herself up that said she had not entirely stopped being afraid yet. She looked at Grant, and for a moment neither of them said anything, because there was too much to say, and the waffle restaurant was not the setting for most of it. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Thanks for the waffles," he said, which came out more deflecting than he intended, and she recognized it for what it was and let it go. Sophie climbed down from her chair and looked at Lily with the focused assessment of a child conducting an evaluation. "You have a good book," she said, looking at the paperback Lily had brought along in her coat pocket. Lily pulled it out and looked at it. "I've read it 3 times, she said. "I can tell," Sophie said, studying the dog-eared spine. "Do you read it slow or fast?" "Depends on the chapter," Lily said. Sophie nodded, apparently satisfied. "I'll sit next to you," she announced, and did. Grant sat across from Vivienne. The Grant waffle menus were laminated and enormous and gave him something to look at while he collected himself. "I wanted to started."
"Vivienne started. You really don't have to."
"Grant," she said his name like it was a small correction, and he closed his mouth. "I've done this specific conversation 4 times in my head this week. Please let me finish it." He put down the menu. "Sorry," he said. "Go ahead." She looked at him directly. She had dark eyes and the kind of steadiness in them that came from making hard decisions consistently over a long period of time. What did on Friday night, I understand enough about what happened to know that it was not the behavior of someone who works in logistics coordination. He said nothing. I'm not asking for an explanation, she said. That's yours to keep. What I am saying is that you made a choice to put yourself between my daughter and something very dangerous, and it cost you something. I don't know exactly what, maybe your privacy, maybe something else, but I know it cost you something, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't. She paused. Thank you. That's what I wanted to say. Grant looked at the table for a moment. On the other side of him, he could hear Lily explaining to Sophie the specific structural problem with Marcus's baking soda calculations, and Sophie listening with what sounded like genuine scientific engagement. She could have been taken, he said finally. Not to diminish what she'd said, just because it needed to be acknowledged. Was real. What they had planned. Vivienne's expression shifted. She said, yes, I know. Is she okay? He nodded towards Sophie, who was now showing Lily something on a tablet that appeared to involve deep-sea anglerfish. She's sleeping better than I am, Vivienne said, with the wry honesty of someone who has been awake at 3 for 4 consecutive nights thinking about how close it came. She's talking about it, which apparently is good. She asked me this morning if the man who told her to run was going to come to dinner. Grant looked over at Sophie, who, at that moment, happened to glance up from the tablet and look directly at him. She studied him for a moment, with the same serious dark eyes he remembered from across the diner. Then she went back to the anglerfish. The police told me about your background, Vivienne said. The details. Just enough. He waited. For what it's worth, she said, I'm glad you were in that diner on Friday night. He picked up the menu again, not because he needed to look at it, but because he needed somewhere to put his hand. We almost always get the sweet potato fries, he said. Lily hates them, but it's tradition. Vivienne blinked at the non sequitur. Something relaxed around her eyes, just slightly, just enough. Sophie always orders waffles and eats half, she said. Every time, without fail. That tracks, Lily said from across the table, without looking up from the tablet. Grant looked at his daughter, and at the serious, small girl beside her explaining the bioluminescence of deep-sea organisms, and at the woman across from him who had survived a very bad Friday night and come back to a waffle restaurant in a small Colorado town, because she had something she needed to say in person. The waiter came and they ordered. Sophie got waffles. After a period of principled deliberation, got the same. Grant got coffee. Vivienne wrapped her hands around a mug of tea and looked out the window at the gray December street, and after a moment of quiet, she said something that surprised him. Do you ever miss it? He looked at her. Miss what? She nodded at him, not at any specific thing, just at him, the whole of him. The version that had walked back into an armed situation 3 times on a Friday night and hadn't shaken until it was over. Whatever it was, she said. Before Millhaven, Grant thought about the question the way he thought about all the questions that mattered carefully, without rushing it, he said. Then, because she deserved the more honest version, not the way you mean, the violence of it, the purpose of it sometimes, the clarity. He looked at his coffee cup. Everything else goes gray when it's that simple. There's no such thing as gray when someone needs to be stopped. Vivienne looked at him steadily. And now? He looked at Lily, who was laughing at something on the tablet screen, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind she made when she forgot she was being watched. Everything is gray, he said, and I prefer it. Vivienne followed his gaze to the 2 girls across the table. Sophie was laughing too now, at whatever Lily had said, and it was the first time Grant had seen her face open completely, the seriousness lifting, the tension breaking, a 7-year-old just being 7. Vivienne Ashford, CEO of a $4 billion company, watched her daughter laugh in a waffle restaurant in a small Colorado town, and something in her face that had been locked down tight since Friday night finally came loose. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The waffles arrived. The coffee was decent. Outside, the December wind moved down Route 6 and rattled the sign above the door, and inside Hanover's it was warm and orange-lit and smelled like maple syrup, and, for the first time in 4 days, neither of the adults at the table was thinking about what almost happened. The waffles at Hanover's were gone, and the coffee cups had been refilled twice, and the girls had migrated from the tablet to a paper napkin, on which Sophie was drawing something that Lily was critiquing with the focused attention she usually reserved for science fair methodology, and the evening had gone on longer than Grant had told himself it would. He noticed it, the way he noticed most things without deciding to. The way Vivienne had stopped holding her tea mug with both hands and was now holding it with one, more relaxed, her other hand resting on the table. The way she'd laughed twice, genuinely, not the careful kind at things he'd said that were not particularly funny, which meant she was tired enough that her guard had come down past the level she probably intended. The way she kept glancing at Sophie and then looking away quickly, like she was checking a wound to see if it had closed. He understood that. He'd done it with Lily every 20 minutes for the past 4 days. "It's almost 8, he said, as an accusation, just as information. Vivienne looked at her watch and made a face. "Sophie has school tomorrow." She looked across the table. "Soph, come on." Coat. Sophie looked up from the napkin with the expression of someone who had just been interrupted mid-thesis. "I'm not finished. You can finish in the car." "It's a napkin," Sophie said with impeccable logic. "I'll take it." Lily helped her fold it without being asked. Grant watched this and noted it, and stored it in the category of things about his daughter that he would probably think about at 3 in the morning. They paid. He and Vivienne had a brief and slightly awkward exchange about it, in which both of them reached for the check at the same time, and Vivienne won through sheer speed and the tactical advantage of having her card out already. He let it go. He'd learned to pick which things to push on. Outside, the December wind came off the mountains with real personality. Sophie immediately grabbed Vivienne's hand and pressed against her side, and Lily pulled her coat closed and looked at the sky with the assessing expression of someone checking the weather for professional reasons. "Could snow," Lily said. "It smells like snow," Sophie agreed, from the shelter of her mother's side. "It doesn't smell like anything," Lily said. "It's just cold air. It smells different before snow," Sophie said, with the quiet certainty of a child who has decided something and is not going to be argued out of it. Lily considered this. Maybe she allowed, which, for Lily, was essentially a concession speech. Vivienne looked at Grant over the tops of both their heads. Something intervened. There was something in the look that was half amusement and half something more tired and more real than amusement. Expression of a person who is finding their footing in a situation they hadn't planned for and is not sure yet whether the ground is solid. "Thank you," she said again. "For tonight. For everything." "The waffles were good," he said. She smiled. It reached her eyes this time, which the Friday night version had been too tightly wound for. "Yes, they were." She paused. "I'd like to stay in touch, if that's okay." "Sophie's been asking about Lily." "I've been asking about Sophie, too," Lily said, without looking up, apparently monitoring the conversation from a low altitude. "Sure," Grant said. They exchanged numbers in the parking lot. Old-fashioned way, him reading his out and her typing it in. And then Vivienne and Sophie got into a car that was understated enough to not draw attention and expensive enough that Grant clocked it anyway. And he watched the taillights go down Route 6 and disappear where the road curved toward the highway. Lily stood beside him in the cold. "She's okay," Lily said. "Sophie, both of them." She thought about it. "Sophie's more okay than her mom right now. But her mom is trying." Grant looked down at her. "When did you get so perceptive?" "I've always been perceptive," Lily said with absolute sincerity. "You just don't always notice." He put his hand on top of her head briefly, and she didn't duck away from it, which she sometimes did. They got in the truck and drove home through the dark, and the mountains were black shapes against a slightly less black sky, and Lily fell asleep again before they reached Birchwood Lane. The phone call Grant had been half expecting came 11 days later. Not from Vivienne. From a man named Carver who identified himself as working for a federal task force that had been assembled in the wake of the Silver Pine incident, and who called at 7:45 in the morning, which Grant noted as a deliberate choice, the hour designed to catch someone before they had fully assembled their day. "We'd like to meet," Carver said. He had the voice of someone who had been told to be friendly and was technically complying. "What?" Grant said. "About what happened in Millhaven, and some related matters. I gave a full statement to Detective Reyes. We're aware of that. Carver said. This is a separate conversation. Grant poured coffee and said nothing for a moment. Outside, through the kitchen window. Outside, Lily was visible, in the backyard's cushions, throwing a tennis ball against the fence and catching it, one of the things she did when she was working through something. She'd been doing it more since the diner. Not obsessively, just regularly. He watched her throw and catch, and the rhythm of it was steadying, even from inside. Where? Grant said. Denver. Or we can come to you. Denver's fine, Grant said. When? Tomorrow works, if that's convenient. And about it was convenient. He arranged it anyway. Because the alternative was having these people arrive in Millhaven, and Millhaven was his, and he preferred to keep it that way. He did not tell Lily where he was going. He told her he had a work meeting in Denver and arranged for her to spend the day with their neighbor Carol, who was 63 and made excellent grilled cheese, and let Lily watch nature documentaries without time limits. Lily accepted this without visible suspicion, which meant either she trusted him or she had decided not to push it, and he couldn't tell which. Denver was a 2-hour drive. He did it in weather that couldn't decide between clear and overcast and settled on both, alternating every 20 minutes. The address Carver had given him, nondescript federal building, on a street with other nondescript federal buildings, which told him something about how seriously they were taking this. Carver turned out to be 40-something. Everything, medium height, medium build, medium-colored hair, that was making early decisions about going gray. He had the quality of someone who was good at becoming unmemorizable, which was itself a kind of skill. He shook Grant's hand with the practiced warmth of someone who'd done a lot of handshaking in rooms like this one. There was a second person in the room, a woman, late 30s, introduced as Paulson, who had a laptop open and did not offer to shake hands and had the patient, focused energy of someone who was there to listen rather than talk. We appreciate you coming in, Carver said. Tell me what this is about, Grant said. Carver nodded, accepting the preference for directness. He opened a folder on the table between them. The men from the Silver Pine incident. We've been running backgrounds. The leader, the one you had the most direct contact with, his name is Victor Rell. He's not domestic. He's the operational arm of a group that's been active in Western Europe for about 4 years. Cheats, doing exactly this, targeting technology assets, family members of executives, leveraging personal relationships for corporate intelligence or outright theft. Sophisticated, Grant said. Very. Well-funded. We believe they have inside access to executive security schedules, travel plans. He paused. Which means Ashford Technologies has a source problem. I mentioned that to Reyes. She passed it along. Carver looked at him. You identified it in real time. During the incident. It was apparent. Carver looked at the folder. Your file says Special Warfare Operator. Navy SEAL 8 years. 3 deployments. A 4th that's, he paused carefully, listed under a classification I don't have access to, which tells me something. It tells you it's classified, Grant said. Yes, Carver said. It does. He closed the folder. I'm not here to dig into your service record. I want to be clear about that. What I want to talk about is whether you'd be willing to consult informally on the Ashford situation. Grant looked at him. The group isn't done, Carver said. Wasn't the decision maker. He's operational. Whoever authorized the Millhaven action is still active, still interested in what Ashford Technologies has, and still has access to her company's internal information. She has a new security team in place, but he spread his hand slightly. She's a technological problem going through a security lens. Don't always fit. I live in Millhaven, Grant said. I do logistics coordination. I have an 8-year-old daughter. We know that. Then you know why my answer is no. Carver was quiet for a moment. Not offended, more the expression of someone who had anticipated this answer and had decided to wait through it. Ms. Ashford asked about you specifically, he said. She knows you spoke with us. Grant went still. She didn't ask us to pressure you, Carver added quickly. She wanted us to be honest with you about the situation. Those were her words. She said you seemed like someone who preferred honesty. He thought about the parking lot, outside Hanover's. Way Vivienne had stood in the cold, with her daughter pressed against her side. The way she'd looked at him over the tops of both girls' heads. With that expression, he hadn't quite been able to name. What's the actual threat level? Grant said. Honest assessment. Carver and Paulson exchanged a look. Paulson turned her laptop slightly, so Grant could see the screen without her releasing it. The assessment was 3 pages. He read it quickly. The way he'd learned to read things like this, scanning for the operative sentences, the ones with the weight behind them. He found 2. The first said that Ashford Technology's primary asset, a data security architecture that 3 separate federal agencies had flagged as strategically significant, was not the kind of thing that a group like REL's organization walked away from after one failed attempt. The second said that the most efficient pressure point for extracting compliance from Vivienne Ashford was her daughter. Grant handed the laptop back. "I'll think about it," he said. He thought about it on the 2-hour drive back to Millhaven, with the mountains on his left going in and out of cloud and the radio off and the heater doing its slow, inadequate work. He thought about it the way he thought about most things he didn't want to think about, by running it straight at instead of around it. The facts were simple. A sophisticated group wanted something from a woman, and the most efficient to get it was through her child. He had been in the room when they tried it once and had stopped it. They would try again, maybe not the same method, maybe not the same target, but the pressure would be reapplied, was how these organizations worked. They had resources and patience, and no particular emotional investment in how many attempts it took. Vivienne Ashford had a new security team. They were competent. They had the conventional skill set and the conventional blind spots that came with it. They were looking at the problem through a lens that was about physical protection and access control, and what Carver's assessment had correctly identified was that this was also an intelligence problem, a problem about information moving out of the company to the people who wanted to use it. Grant knew how to think about that kind of problem. He knew how to think about it in ways that most security teams didn't, because he had spent 8 years in environments where the consequences of not thinking about it correctly were measured in ways that didn't allow for a second assessment. Yes, he'd intervened. He did not want to get back into it. He also had known since he sat at the kitchen table that first night and ran through the diner in his head that he had already gotten back into it. The moment he moved out from under the booth, he'd crossed back over something he'd spent 6 years carefully standing on the correct side of. Was done. You couldn't uncross it. The question was what to do with that. He pulled into the driveway on Birchwood Lane and sat in the truck for a moment. The house was dark except for the living room light, which meant Carol was still there, which meant Lily was still up, which meant she'd stretched the nature documentary allowance as far as it would go. He went inside. Carol was in the armchair with a paperback, and Lily was on the couch with a blanket and the remote, watching something about migratory whales with the focused engagement of a marine biologist in training. "You're back late," Lily said, without looking away from the whales. "Traffic," Grant said. Carol looked at him with the brief assessing look of a woman who had raised 3 children and had a functional nonsense detector. She didn't say anything. She put her coat and left with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood when a room needed fewer people in it. Lily watched the whales for another minute. Then she turned the TV off. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." She turned on the couch to look at him. She had the blanket wrapped around her shoulders and her hair was doing the thing it did when she'd been lying on Quinson's side, in a way she would have been mortified by if she'd noticed. "You didn't have a work meeting." He looked at her. "How do you know that?" "Because you have your other face on," she said. "The one where you're thinking about something complicated, and you're deciding how much to tell me." He sat down in the armchair Carol had vacated. It was still warm. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at his daughter across the coffee table. "It was a meeting about what happened at the diner," he said. She absorbed this. "Federal people? Yes. Are we in trouble?" "You're not. I'm not either." He paused. "They want help with something. Something related to Vivienne, to Ms. Ashford. The people who came into the diner, it's not finished. They want to make sure it doesn't happen again." Lily looked at him for a long moment. She had the expression of someone doing arithmetic in their head, not addition. Something more complicated. "And you said no," she said. "I said I'd think about it." Pause. "But you want to say no. I've been saying no to things like this for 6 years," he said.
What's that?
"I built something here. You and me. Birchwood Lane. Diane's Diner, your school. That's what I want." "I know," Lily said. "I didn't leave all of that behind so I could walk back into it. Dad." He looked at her. But she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. But Sophie's 7, she said, and they're not done. He closed his eyes for a second. I'm not telling you what to do, she said quickly. That's not I'm 8. It's not my call. You're almost 9, he said. Almost 9, she agreed. She looked at the dark television. I just think she stopped. Started again. I think you already know what you're going to do. And I think it's okay. Whatever it is. She looked at him. I'm not going to break. You know that, right? Grant looked at his daughter, her serious face, her wild sleep-flattened hair, her blanket-wrapped dignity, and felt the complicated weight of having raised a person who was, in the ways that mattered most, considerably braver than he was. That, he said. Okay, she said. She stood up, blanket still around her shoulders, and padded toward the hallway. Then she stopped. Are you going to call her Ms. Ashford? Probably, he said. Good. She disappeared down the hall. A moment later, from her room, good night. Good night, he said. He sat in the warm armchair for a while after that, in the quiet house on Birchwood Lane, and then he picked up his phone. Vivienne picked up on the second ring. I talked to Carver, Grant said. I know, he told me, a pause. I want to be clear, I didn't ask them to contact you. I told them the situation, and I know, he said. It's fine. A silence. Outside, a wind had picked up and was moving through the pine on the east, making the sound it always made in December, not threatening, just present, the mountain asserting itself quietly. They showed me the assessment, he said. Yes, her voice had gone careful, guarded, more the tone of someone who is holding a difficult thing and has learned not to grip it too tight. I've read it 3 times. She stopped. I have good people around Sophie now, better than before. But the assessment says...
I know what it says.
Another pause. I'm not calling you back in. I want to be clear about that too. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe Sophie anything, what you did. Stop, he said, harshly. Just as a direction. I've heard that part. I'm not looking for more of it. She was quiet. He could hear her breathing, not in a dramatic way, just the ordinary sound of someone on the other end of a phone who was waiting. Tell me about the source problem, he said. A pause. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted, the CEO coming back to the surface, but less armored than the version he'd heard across the corner booth at the diner. This was the version that had decided to trust him. I have 17 people with access to my travel schedule at any given time. Assistants, security liaisons, drivers, hotel booking team. The leak could be any of them. It could be a systems breach. He set Sien. It could be someone in my network who sold information without understanding what they were selling. Or someone who understood exactly what they were selling, Grant said. The word came out flat and tired. That too. Have you changed your travel protocols since the incident? Completely. Different booking systems, different communication channels. I've had my devices wiped and replaced. But if the source is a person rather than a system, then they adjust, Grant said. Yes, he thought about this. He thought about Rel's face as they walked him out of the diner, that considering cataloging look. The look of someone filing information for later use. The leader. He's in federal custody? Yes. He hasn't said anything useful, apparently. He won't. He's operational, he doesn't have the source. Someone else does. Grant was quiet for a moment. The technology, the thing they want. What is it, specifically? She hesitated. I'm not asking so I can sell it, he said. I'm asking because the nature of what they want tells me something about who inside your organization they might have gotten to. The pause. Longer. He heard her making a decision. It's a data security architecture, she said. Encrypted communication infrastructure. The kind that's extremely difficult for third parties to access. Several governments want it. Some of them are governments we'd prefer didn't have it. And you've been approached officially, through legitimate channels, multiple times. I've declined. Her voice had something flat in it. The technology isn't for sale. It's a protective system. The moment I sell it to the wrong entity, it becomes an offensive one. Grant sat with this for a moment. The scope of it was larger than a diner in Colorado. He had understood that from Carver's assessment, but hearing it from her made it concrete in a different way. This was not a corporate espionage situation. This was a geopolitical one, wearing corporate clothing. Okay, he said. Okay, she repeated. I'll look at the source problem, he said. Informally, I'm not joining your security team. I'm not going to Denver. I'll look at what you can share with me remotely and tell you what I think. A silence. Why, she said, not suspiciously genuinely. He thought about Lily saying Sophie's 7, and they're not done, in her blanket on the couch. He thought about the assessment and its 2 operative sentences. Because I can, he said, and because I'd rather be the one looking at it than read about it in a news report. She let out a breath. Thank you. Don't, he said, and she understood and didn't finish the sentence. The file arrived encrypted the next morning. Carver's people had apparently been anticipating his decision, and Grant spent 4 days reading through it at the kitchen table in the mornings while Lily was at school, cross-referencing personnel access logs with travel records and communication timestamps. It was slow and careful work, the kind that required patience more than instinct. He made coffee and read personnel files and built a mental map of the information flow through Ashford Technologies, who knew Nummit, what, when, and who they talked to afterward. He looked for patterns the way he'd been trained to look for them, not in the obvious places, but in the small irregular gaps where a pattern should have been and wasn't. He found it on the 4th day. Not a person, not yet, but a pattern in the booking system, a specific type of itinerary query that had been run 3 times in the past 6 months, always originating from a legitimate internal terminal, always within 48 hours of a significant change to Vivienne's schedule, and always followed by a secondary query that looked like a routine system check, but wasn't. He wrote up what he'd found in the spare and factual way he'd learned to write reports. No speculation, no drama, just the data and what it indicated. He sent it to Carver, and separately in a shorter message to Vivienne. Her response came 40 minutes later. It was 3 words. How did you find that? He typed back, pattern recognition. Your tech team should be able to trace the terminal from here. A longer pause. Then they are. Grant. They said this could have taken weeks. He set the phone down and went back to the logistics spreadsheet that he was genuinely, technically behind on, because SEAL training did not make agricultural supply chain reports complete themselves. The tech team traced the terminal to a mid-level IT administrator named Carter Briggs, 29 years old, who had been with Ashford Technologies for 14 months. When federal investigators looked at his financials, they found a sequence of deposits into an account registered to his mother's address in Ohio, each one modest enough to avoid triggering automated flags, collectively substantial enough to explain why. Briggs was taken into custody on a Wednesday morning. He gave up his contact within 6 hours, which Carver relayed to Grant with the flat economy of someone delivering a score. The contact is mid-level in the organization, Carver said on the phone. Rel's level, but he's given us a thread. We're pulling it. Good, Grant said. You know, I could make a case for why you should be doing this professionally, Carver said. You could, Grant said. Don't. A pause. Ms. Ashford asked me to tell you something. She has my number. She wanted it to come through official channels so you understood it was serious. Carver's voice had something in it that might have been amusement, carefully contained. She said, thank you, and the offer stands, and she'll find a way to keep bothering you until you figure out what to do with that. Grant looked out the kitchen window. The pine tree was moving in the wind. The sky was the flat white of a Colorado winter that had decided to commit. That sounds like her, he said. Christmas came to Millhaven the way it came every year gradually, and then all at once. The hardware store on Main Street put up its lights the first week of December, and the diner put up theirs the second week, and by the third week, the whole town had the particular glow of a place that took the holiday seriously without making it competitive. The Silver Pine Diner was still closed. The reopening had been announced for January, pending the completion of repairs that were partly structural and partly cosmetic. The booth near the kitchen door had been taken apart for evidence and hadn't been reassembled, so yes, it had been intervened. The front door had been replaced twice because the first replacement turned out to have a hinge problem that Diane had declared personally offensive and refused to accept. Grant knew all of this because Diane called him every 10 days or so with updates, in the manner of someone who had decided he was part of the Silver Pines extended family and was not going to ask his permission about it. The new booth seat is the wrong color red, she told him, the week before Christmas. I ordered Canyon Red. They sent me cherry. Those are not the same thing. They're both red, Grant said. Canyon Red is a dignified color, Diane said. Cherry red is a color for sports cars and maraschino cherries. This is a diner. We have standards. You'll send it back? I've already sent it back, she said. Twice. The third one better be right, or I'm driving to the warehouse myself. He thought about Diane, standing in the kitchen with the cast iron skillet, the night everything went sideways head, and the way she'd put it down when he shook his head. The quality of her, the sheer unassailable denseness of her, in a situation that would have broken a lot of people. Diane, he said, you did good that night. You kept everyone calm in the kitchen. A pause. When she spoke again, her voice had something different, in it less the diner manager, more the woman underneath. I was terrified, she said. I had that skillet, and I thought I don't know what I thought. That I was going to, she stopped. My hands shook for 3 days afterward. I didn't tell anyone. Hands are allowed to shake, Grant said. You weren't scared. I was scared the whole time, he said. I was just busy. Another pause. Well, Diane said. Canyon Red. January 15th. Mark your calendar. I'll be there, he said. Vivienne called on Christmas Eve, which surprised him slightly, and didn't surprise him at all. Lily was in bed, theoretically asleep, mystically listening for any sound that might indicate a present was being moved, and Grant was sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee that was going cold in the December fair, looking at the mountains, which were dark against a sky that was doing something interesting with stars. Merry Christmas, she said when he picked up. You too, he said. How's Sophie? She made me wrap her presents 3 days ago and put them under the tree, and now she's staring at them. A warmth in her voice that hadn't been there in the diner or the waffle restaurant, something looser. She wrapped one for Lily, by the way. You'll get it in the mail. He looked at the sky. Lily made something for Sophie. I'll send it after the holiday. What did she make? A field guide to deep-sea fish. She spent 2 weeks on it. He paused, because describing it accurately required acknowledging that it was one of the most impressive things an 8-year-old had ever produced, which felt immodest. It's thorough. Vivienne laughed, the real one, the involuntary kind. Sophie is going to treasure that. A quiet settled between them that was comfortable in a way that quiet between two people becomes when they've talked enough times that silence doesn't require filling. I wanted to ask you something, Vivienne said. Okay, the crisis prevention program. The thing Carver mentioned. Grant was quiet. It's not what you think, she said quickly. It's not a security company. There's a proposal on the table from a nonprofit coalition to develop a civilian crisis training program. Practical education for ordinary people. How to recognize threat indicators. How to move people to safety. How to stay functional when everything goes sideways. She paused. The kind of things that you just do. Instinctively. The things that saved lives in that diner. It wasn't instinct, Grant said. It was training. Exactly, she said. That's the point. Those skills can be taught. To school staff, to community volunteers, to parents. Another pause. Hut intervened. They're looking for someone to lead the development of the curriculum. To run operations. Not to be anyone's private army. To teach. To build something that helps families. He looked at the mountains. He thought about Lily under the booth table, staying exactly where he told her, not making a sound. He thought about Sophie not crying until after she was safe. He thought about Diane setting down the skillet. Who's funding it, he said. Several sources. My company is one of them. She said it simply, without the bracing quality of someone expecting an argument. Before you say anything, my company is involved, because I believe in it, not because I'm trying to buy your participation. You would be compensated through the nonprofit directly. Ownership, no non-disclosure, no strings. Are always strings, Grant said. There are terms, she corrected. Those are different things. Terms can be negotiated. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. The cold had reached through his jacket and settled in, the way Colorado cold did, not aggressive, just patient. I'd want to see the full proposal, he said. I'll send it tomorrow. On Christmas. The day after Christmas, she said, with the precision of someone who had learned to make commitments she intended to keep. I'll send it on the 26th. He nodded to himself, which was pointless on a phone call and happened anyway. How are you? He said. Actually. A pause. The careful kind, not evasive, more like the pause of someone who has been answering this question on the surface for several weeks and is deciding whether to answer it for real. I had a security briefing 3 days ago, she said. They traced another link in the organization. Carver thinks they're close to the decision maker. The person who actually authorized Sophie's, she stopped. Started again. The actual threat level has dropped significantly. They're pulling back. They know they've been compromised. That's good, he said.
Yes!
A breath. I look at her differently. Sophie, I think I always will a little. Does that go away? He thought about the first 6 months after he left the Navy. The way he'd cataloged exits everywhere he went. The way he'd flinched at certain sounds for longer than he wanted to admit. Some of it does, he said. Some of it you just make room for. She was quiet for a moment. That's honest. You said you preferred honest. I do, she said. Sometimes I forget what honest feels like. He understood that. He'd spent 6 years in Millhaven, remembering what ordinary felt like, one Friday night at a time, one cup of coffee and sweet potato fries and Lily's complaints about the menu at a time. Relearning of it. The slow, patient work of choosing something smaller and quieter than what you'd been trained for. Give it time, he said, and call when Sophie wants to talk to Lily. Lily checks in on the anglerfish situation regularly. Vivienne laughed again. Sophie updated her diagram this week. Added 3 new species. Lily will want to be consulted on the taxonomic accuracy. I'll tell Sophie to brace herself. A pause. Merry Christmas, Grant. Merry Christmas, he said. He sat on the porch after she hung up, with the cold coffee and the patient Colorado cold and the mountains going on in the dark, and he thought about what she'd described the curriculum, the training, the ordinary people who might know what to do when everything went sideways. He intervened. He thought about what it would mean to build something like that, instead of being something like that. He did not arrive at a conclusion. He sat with the question the way the mountains sat with the weather, without rushing it, without pretending it was simpler than it was. From inside the house, very faintly, he heard the floorboard creak in the hallway that creaked every time Lily walked over it, no matter how carefully she tried not to, and then the sound of small feet retreating back toward her room. He turned around and looked at the dark house. "Good night, Lily," he said, loud enough to carry. A pause. Then, from somewhere down the hall, "I was just getting water." "Of course you were," he said. "Good night," she said. He turned back to the mountains and finished the cold coffee. And the stars did their slow, indifferent work overhead. And in the morning there would be presents under the tree, and Lily's absolute certainty about what each package contained, and the particular sweet chaos of a household, with one child and too much wrapping paper. And for now, that was enough. The proposal arrived on the 26th, as promised. Grant read it at the kitchen table while Lily sat across from him, working through a library book about ocean geology that she had requested specifically for Christmas and received with the solemn satisfaction of someone whose gift list had been taken seriously. She had a pencil and was underlining things, which she was technically not supposed to do in library books. And Grant had decided that this was a battle for another day. The proposal was 43 pages. He read it the same way he'd read the federal assessment, looking for the operative sentences, the ones that carried the actual weight. What he found was that Vivienne had been precise on the phone. The nonprofit coalition was real. The funding structure was legitimate. The scope was exactly what she described. A civilian crisis preparedness curriculum, built from the ground up, designed for school staff and community organizations, and the kind of ordinary people who found themselves in extraordinary situations without any framework for navigating them. There was a section on outcomes. It listed the kinds of situations the curriculum was intended to address: active threat scenarios, medical emergencies, natural disasters, situations where law enforcement response time was measured in minutes and the decisions made in the first 90 seconds determined everything that followed. The language was careful and practical and entirely devoid of the bureaucratic foam that usually padded documents like this. Someone had written it who understood what they were talking about. He flipped to the back page. The lead author credit read V. Ashford, in collaboration with E. Reyes, Millhaven County Sheriff's Department. He set the proposal down. "Is that the thing?" Lily said without looking up from her ocean geology. "What thing?" "The thing you've been deciding about." He looked at her. "You've been reading?" "I can do 2 things, she said. She underlined something. "Is it?" "Yes," he said. He looked at the proposal. 43 pages. Canyon red booth seats and Diane's cast iron skillet and Sophie not crying until she was safe. 8 years of moving hostages, and 11 minutes in a dark diner kitchen, and a whole life built on the careful, deliberate premise that the past was finished. I'm thinking, he said. Lily turned a page. Okay, she said in the tone of who said what they needed to say and is satisfied to let the other person arrive on their own. He called Vivienne that afternoon. I have questions, he said. I assumed you would, she said. The curriculum development, how long? 8 to 12 months for the first version. Pilot program in 3 school districts. Quarterly revision cycles after that. And my involvement after the pilot? Entirely at your discretion. There's no contract beyond the development phase. If you decide it's not what you want to be doing, you walk away with 2 months' notice, and whatever you've built stays with the program. He thought about this. Reyes, he said, how involved is she? Very. She's the liaison between the program and law enforcement. She wanted her name on it. She said it was the most useful thing she'd done in 3 years of paperwork. Grant almost smiled. And the children's component? There was a section about school-age curriculum. That one was Sophie's idea, actually, Vivienne said. A brief pause, the kind that had affection in it. She came home from school in November and told me that her class had a fire drill and nobody knew what to do, and the teacher was more scared than the kids. She said someone should teach people how to not panic. Another pause. She said it in the voice of someone who had recent relevant experience. He was quiet for a moment. She's going to be something, that kid. She really is, Vivienne said. So is yours. Yeah, he looked out the window. Birchwood Lane was quiet, in the way it got in the week between Christmas and New Year, that particular spent quality, like the town was holding its breath between things. Okay, he said. Okay, I'll do the development phase, he said. 8 months, not 12. I work from Millhaven. I don't relocate. I'm not available for anything operational. No security work, no threat assessment, nothing outside the curriculum. Agreed. And the children's component gets equal resources as the adult curriculum. A sidebar. A full parallel track. That was already in the proposal, she said. I'm saying it out loud, so we both know it's a priority, not a promise. A pause. Agreed, she said again, with something in it that sounded like respect. I'll need to talk to Lily first, he said. This affects her schedule too. Of course. And I want to talk to Reyes directly. Before I sign anything. I'll set it up, Vivienne said. A brief pause. Thank you. Don't, he said with less force than before. She heard the difference. She didn't push it. He talked to Lily that evening, after dinner, in the living room with the Christmas tree still up, notes, and throwing its quiet-colored light across the walls. He laid it out plainly, what the work was, what it would mean for his schedule, that it would require some travel in the early months, and that Carol would need to cover more school pickups. Lily listened with her legs folded under her on the couch and her ocean geology book face down on the cushion beside her, which meant she had set it down on purpose, which meant she was treating this as a conversation that deserved her full attention. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. So you're going to teach people, she said. That's the idea. How to do what you did. In the diner. Parts of it's it, he said. The parts that can be taught without the parts that don't require 10 years of other things first. She thought about this with the thoroughness she brought to most things. That's good, she said. Yeah? You're good at explaining things, she said. When you explain things, I understand them. Even the hard ones. She looked at the Christmas tree. And you won't be doing the fighting part. Just the teaching. She nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Carol doesn't let me watch more than 2 hours of nature documentaries, though. Just so you know, there's a limit. I'll talk to her, he said. Tell her the deep sea ones are educational. They are educational. She thinks I'm watching them for fun, Lily said. Which I am. But they're also educational. Both things are true. He looked at his daughter, in the colored Christmas light. She was going to be 9 in February. He had been in Millhaven since she was 2, had raised her in this house on this street in this town that nothing much happened in, and she had grown into someone who sat beside frightened strangers in the dark and knew, without being told, when a situation required stillness and when it required a father to get off the kitchen floor and make a different choice. He said, You know, you can always tell me if something feels wrong. About any of this. If it gets complicated or you don't like how it feels. She said, Dad. She looked at him with the direct, undecorated honesty that lumped Hipless when she wanted him to actually hear something. You've been careful for 6 years. You can stop being quite so careful now. He opened his mouth and closed it again. I'm going to be 9, she said. I'm not going to shatter. He looked at the tree. I know that. Okay, she said, and picked up her book, which meant the conversation was over and everything important had been said. January arrived with a week of hard snow that buried Millhaven in the particular hush that only deep snow-created sound absorbed. Edges softened, the town looking briefly like a photograph of itself rather than the actual thing. School was canceled for 3 days. Grant made soup and Lily read, and the wood stove in the corner of the living room did its slow, reliable work, and the pause of it was not uncomfortable. He had his first call with Reyes on the 8th of January. From the kitchen table while Lily was building something architecturally ambitious with a set of blocks she had publicly declared herself too old for, and privately still used when she thought he wasn't watching. Mr. Halden, Reyes said, and there was something in her voice that had shifted from the county detective who'd told him not to go anywhere. Something warmer, less procedural. I'm glad you're in. Tell me what you're trying to build, he said. She told him. She was clear and specific and did not over-explain things, which he appreciated. What she described was a modular system, different tracks for different contexts, with a core set of principles that ran through all of them. The law enforcement integration was her area. The practical training methodology was his. The technology backbone, the documentation systems, the simulation tools was Vivienne's. The problem I keep running into, Reyes said, is that most crisis training is built around worst-case scenarios. Active shooter drills that terrify 12-year-olds. Lockdown protocols that nobody practices until the actual lockdown. What I want is something that builds capacity before the crisis. So that when it happens, and it happens, Grant, it happens. It always happens, people have a framework instead of a blank. The blank is the problem, Grant said. Exactly. Panic isn't stupidity. It's what happens when a person has no script for what they're experiencing. You give people a script, even a rough one, and they use it. He thought about the couple in the booth on the night of December 14th. The man in his 60s who had looked at Grant coming out from under the neighboring booth, and then after one moment of pure terror, nodded. That nod. The decision to trust the framework when the framework appeared. The children's track, Grant said. How are you thinking about it? Age appropriate, Ray said. Nothing that produces fear as a side effect. The goal is confidence, not alertness. Kids who feel capable make better decisions than kids who feel watched. Sophie Ashford told her mother that her class had a fire drill where the teacher was more scared than the kids, Grant said. A pause. That's not unusual, Reyes said quietly. Adults frequently underprepare for their own panic. We start with adults, Grant said. Yes, and we build backward from there. Capacity supports child capacity. She paused. You've thought about this. I've thought about the night at the diner, he said. Backward and forward, probably 500 times. That's the curriculum, she said. Honestly, that's the whole thing. What you did in there systematically, without panic, moving people towards safety while maintaining situational awareness, that's what we're trying to replicate in people who've never had 8 years of specialized training. You can't fully replicate it, he said. No, but you can give someone a 20% version of it. And 20% of that capacity in an ordinary civilian is the difference between 9 people making it to the kitchen and 9 people frozen in their seats. He was quiet for a moment. He had not framed it that way before. 20%. The fraction of something that still saves lives. Okay, he said, send me what you have so far, and I'll tell you what's missing. The Silver Pine Diner reopened on the 15th of January, exactly as Diane had predicted. Sixth, with the correct shade of canyon red in the newly installed corner booth, and a front door that hung perfectly, and a welcome sign in the window that was new, but matched the pine tree logo exactly, which Diane had apparently supervised personally. Grant and Lily arrived at 11:30, which was earlier than they usually came, but Diane had called the night before and said, without directly phrasing it as a request, that it would mean something to the staff if some familiar faces came in early. Grant had understood this and said they would be there. The diner smelled exactly the same. Was the first thing he noticed the coffee and the pine wood and the particular warm grease and maple quality that was the Silver Pine's specific atmosphere. unchanged by everything that had happened inside it 6 weeks ago. He was not sure whether that was comforting or strange, and then he decided it was both, and that both was okay. Diane was behind the counter in her apron, and when she saw them, she did something he had never seen her do before. In 6 years of Friday nights, she came around the counter and hugged Lily, briefly and completely, with the unself-conscious warmth of someone who has decided that some things deserve to be said without words. Lily, who had strong opinions about unsolicited hugs, hugged her back. Diane said, releasing her. "Same one," Lily said. They sat in their booth, the same red vinyl, the same electrical tape patches, the same view of the pine-paneled wall with the amateur landscape that had always hung slightly crooked, and Diane brought coffee, without being asked, and apple juice that Lily did not object to. And the Tuesday morning diner filled slowly around them with the ordinary people of Millhaven going about their ordinary lives. Grant wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. He looked at the room, the counter stools, the corner booth near the rear, the kitchen door that swung inward on the left. He did it the way he always did, systematically, before the choice to do it was involved. The exits, the sight lines, the positions of the half-dozen other customers. For the first time in a very long time, he consciously let it go. The awareness that wasn't something he was going to unlearn, and he had stopped trying. But the weight of it, the sense that everything he noticed was potential threat. He let the room be what it was, a diner in a small Colorado town on a cold January morning, smelling like coffee and warm wood, full of people drinking their breakfasts and not being in danger. "Sweet potato fries?" Lily said. "It's 11:30 in the morning." "It's the reopening," she said. "Special occasion." He looked at her. She had her book on the table and her jacket still on, because she hadn't gotten around to taking it off yet, and her hair was doing the sideways thing again. And she was looking at him with the expectant patience of someone who has assessed the odds of getting sweet potato fries at 11:30 and rated them favorably. "Fine," he said. She smiled, not the careful smile she sometimes deployed, but the real one, the one that was too wide, and showed the gap where her left lateral incisor had come out in November, and the permanent one had not fully come in yet. He had a photograph of that smile on his phone that he had never told her about. Diane came by to check on them, and he ordered the fries, and she raised an eyebrow and said nothing, and wrote it down. His phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. A text from Vivienne. "Sophie wants to know if Lily's free Saturday. She found 3 new anglerfish species and says it's urgent." He showed it to Lily. She read it with the seriousness the situation apparently demanded. "Tell her yes," she said. "And tell Sophie I have questions about the taxonomic classification of the Melanocetus species. She may need to prepare materials." Grant typed, "Yes." Lily says Sophie should prepare materials. Sophie will know what that means. 3 dots. Then, oh no, she already has the markers out. "What have you done?" He set the phone down. The sweet potato fries arrived too hot, too much salt, exactly right, and Lily took one, made her assessment, and ate it without complaint, which for Lily was essentially a standing ovation. Outside, Main Street moved through its Tuesday morning at the pace of a town that had decided nothing seismic much needed to happen quickly, and the mountains held their positions on the horizon, and the Silver Pine Diner was open again, and that was enough. The conversation Grant had been half avoiding happened on a Saturday in late January in the parking lot of the Millhaven Public Library, which was not a setting he would have chosen, but which was where it happened. He had brought Lily to return the ocean geology book and pick up 2 others she had requested through the online system. Vivienne had driven Sophie up for a playdate that had been scheduled to happen at the house on Birchwood Lane, but had been preceded by a library stop because Sophie had a book on hold and the library was on the way. The girls had gone in together, Lily leading, Sophie following with the focused attentiveness of someone learning a new city's geography, and Grant and Vivienne were standing in the parking lot in the January cold because neither of them had thought to go inside, and now it seemed too deliberate to do it. She had her coat on the good one, still trying not to look expensive, and her hands in her pockets. No, and she was looking at the library's glass front doors with the expression of someone who is working up to something. "I want to ask you something," she said, the facetious of it, by saying that you're completely free to tell me it's not your business and I won't bring it up again. He looked at her sideways. "Okay, Lily's mother." she said. She died, he said. Lily was 18 months old. A pause. The January wind came down the street and moved through both of them. I'm sorry, Vivienne said. Not the performative kind. The real kind, brief, direct, not padded. It was a long time ago, he said, which was true and not entirely the point, but it was what he had to offer. She nodded. Didn't push it. He found himself appreciating that about her, the ability to receive information without needing to respond to all of it. Why did you ask? He said. She looked at the library doors. Because I've been trying to understand you as a person. And I keep seeing the edges of things. The things you've built here. Way Lily is. The careful way you hold all of it, she paused. I just wanted to know where you started from. He thought about that. It was an unusual way to put it. Her name was Rachel, he said. She was good. She was the better parts of whatever I'm supposed to be. He stopped. Lily has her way of seeing people. The way she's looked at Sophie that night. That's Rachel. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. What happened? Aneurysm, he said. She was 26. She went to bed and she didn't wake up, and that was it. He said it flat and simple the way he had learned to say it, the version that conveyed the information without reopening the whole of it. Lily doesn't remember her. She knows about her. She has photographs. She has the things I tell her. He looked at the mountains. I've tried to make sure she has enough. She has more than enough, Vivienne said. Whatever you've been doing, she has more than enough. He looked at her. She was looking at him directly, not with pity, not with the careful distance people sometimes maintained when the conversation touched death. Just looking at him, the way she looked at most things, straight on, with the full weight of her attention. What about Sophie's father, he said. Because it was only fair. She exhaled. He's not... She paused. He was never really in it. We were together for 2 years, and when I got pregnant, he was supportive right up until the moment it was real, and then he wasn't. Her voice was matter-of-fact, in the way that things became matter-of-fact after they stopped being painful enough to require a different register. He lives in Seattle. He sends Sophie a card on her birthday, usually within a week of the actual day. Sophie calls him by his first name, which she arrived at on her own, and which I have never commented on either way. She doesn't seem Grant started. She's okay, Vivienne said. She's had time. And Sophie doesn't tend to grieve things she can't change. She accepts the shape of things and works with them. A brief pause. She got that from somewhere. I'm just not sure it was me. Maybe she got it from having a mother who didn't fall apart, Grant said. Vivienne looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not dramatically, just a small interior adjustment, the kind that happened when something landed somewhere. It wasn't expected. I fell apart plenty, she said. Just not in front of her. That's the job, he said. She was quiet for a moment. The library doors opened, and a woman came out with 2 small children and a tote bag full of books. And they stepped aside slightly to let her pass, and ended up slightly closer together than they had been, and neither of them stepped back. Grant, she said. I don't know what this is. She said it carefully, nervously, more the way she said things she had thought about and decided to say directly. Whatever we're doing. I don't know what to call it. He looked at the mountains. Neither do I, he said. I'm in Denver most of the week, she said. You're in Millhaven. Sophie is in school. Lily is in school. It's not. He agreed. And you've built something here that's... She stopped. I'm aware that I could be a complication to that. He looked at her then. She was watching with attention to someone who was trying to read something, and wasn't sure she had the right translation yet. You could be, he said. She nodded once, accepting it. You could also be something else, he said. A pause. The cold sat between them, and the mountains held their positions and somewhere inside the library. He knew Lily was evaluating ocean floor topology, and Sophie was preparing materials for a taxonomic argument. Something else like what? She said. He thought about all the careful things he could say. All the qualified, measured, responsible versions of an answer that would protect both of them from overreaching. He had been careful for 6 years. He was good at careful. No yet, he said. But I'd like to find out. Vivienne Ashford looked at him for a long moment. He was aware, in the way he was aware of most things without choosing to be, that she was not someone who moved toward things she wasn't sure about. She had built a company from a concept and held it against people who wanted to take it from her by force. And she had sat in a corner booth, in a Colorado diner, and watched her security guard go down and still refused to let go of her daughter. She did not do things halfway. "Okay," she said. "Just that. One word, with the specific quality of a door that has decided to open." The library doors pushed out again, and Lily appeared, 2 books under her arm. Sophie behind her, talking at speed about something that involved hand gestures. They were not quite running, because Lily had a personal policy against running in public that she considered mature and Grant considered baffling. But they were moving with the urgent energy of 2 children who have important things to say and limited patience for the walk between there and here. "Dad," Lily announced, arriving at his elbow. "Sophie's anglerfish taxonomy is partially incorrect, and we need to go home and look at the source materials." "Partially incorrect," Sophie said with diplomatic precision. "We disagree on the Haematolophidae classification." "The classification is wrong," Lily said. "We disagree," Sophie said again, with the measured firmness of a child who had learned to pick her battles and had decided this one was worth it. Grant looked at Vivienne. She looked back at him. They were both, clearly, trying not to laugh and only partially succeeding. "Birchwood Lane," he said. "We'll follow you," she said. The house on Birchwood Lane had never had 4 people in it before, not counting Carol and the occasional school friend, and it showed in the small ways not enough chairs at the kitchen table without pulling one in from the living room, enough mugs that matched if you cared about that sort of thing, which Lily did and Grant did not. Sophie and Lily spread 3 library books and 2 of Sophie's printed reference sheets across the kitchen table and proceeded to have what was, by any reasonable measure, a highly technical argument about deep-sea fish taxonomy conducted in the earnest vocabulary of 2 children who had read considerably more than was strictly necessary. Grant made coffee. Vivienne sat at the repurposed living room chair and watched her daughter argue with focused enthusiasm about the Melanocetus johnsonii, and had the expression of someone who had not seen enough of this, not the argument, but Sophie in it. The aliveness of her. The way she pressed her point with both hands flat on the table and looked at Lily with competitive respect. "She's happy," Vivienne said quietly. She wasn't talking to Grant specifically. More to herself or to the room. "Yeah," he said. He set a mug in front of her. "She's okay." Vivienne wrapped her hands around the mug, both hands, the way she did when she was cold or when she was settling into something. She looked at Sophie and Lily and then at the kitchen, the wood stove's glow reaching into the room from the adjoining space, the mismatched mugs, 3 years of Lily's school drawings that were still on the refrigerator because Grant had never gotten around to rotating them out and then had decided he didn't want to. "This is a good house," she said.
He looked at it through her eyes for a moment.
The electrical tape repair on the cabinet hinge he'd been meaning to replace for 8 months. The bookshelf in the corner that was slightly too full and had 2 paperbacks lying horizontal on top because there was nowhere else for them. The living room chair she was sitting in that had a permanent slight list to the right because Lily had bounced for 3 years before he'd noticed the frame was damaged. "It's not much," he said. "That's not what I said," she said. He looked at her. She was looking at the kitchen with genuine attention, not the evaluating attention of someone who was finding it lacking, but the attention of someone who recognized something, a quality of place, the particular atmosphere of a house where someone had been raised carefully, within limited means and full presence, and had grown into someone remarkable because of it. He said, It's not. She looked up at him. "I'd like to come back," she said. "If that's—" "Yes," he said, before she finished, which was not his usual approach to things, but felt, in this particular moment, like the correct one. She nodded once, settled. From the kitchen table, Lily said, "Dad, can you get the laptop? We need to look at the Smithsonian's deep-sea database." "Please," Grant said. "Please," Lily said, without missing a beat. "Sophie's taxonomy is potentially salvageable, but we need primary sources." "Partially incorrect," Sophie said for the 3rd time, with the patience of someone who has decided this is a hill. Grant got the laptop. He set it between them, and they descended on it, together, shoulder to shoulder, the argument narrowing from taxonomy to subspecies to a specific disagreement about photophore distribution that he understood approximately 4 words of. He watched them for a moment, the dark curls, and the wild hair, the serious faces, the shared vocabulary of two children who had found each other across a catastrophic night and decided, without anyone arranging it, to be something to each other. He went back to the counter and picked up his coffee. Vivienne was watching the girls too, and something in her face was open in a way he hadn't seen before. Not the CEO, not the careful mother, not the woman who had been holding something tightly for 6 weeks. Just Vivienne, in a warm kitchen on a January afternoon, watching her daughter be happy. He thought about Rachel, briefly, and without the familiar weight that usually accompanied it. He thought about what she would have made of all of this: the diner, the decision, the 43-page proposal, the Saturday afternoon with 2 children arguing about deep-sea fish. He'd intervened. He thought she would have had something accurate, and probably funny, to say about all of it, and that he would have spent the rest of the day thinking about it. He thought she would have liked Vivienne's directness. He thought she would have been relieved, more than anything, to see Lily like this. Dad, Lily said, without looking up from the laptop. The Himmantolofady classification requires your input. You're a neutral party. I am not a neutral party, Grant said. I have no opinion on anglerfish taxonomy. That makes you neutral, Lily said. Sophie looked up from the laptop with the expression of someone ready to present a case. The Melanocetus johnsonii, she said, has been historically misclassified in secondary sources due to photophore pattern similarity with Himmantolophus, but the cranial morphology is... She's right, Lily said. The morphology is different. Just think the database should note it more clearly. A pause. Sophie considered this. That's fair, she said. The database should be clearer. Lily nodded. The argument apparently was resolved. Grant looked at Vivienne. She had her hand over her mouth and her shoulders were moving. He said quietly. I'm not, she said, which was technically not true, and they both knew it, and neither of them said anything further about it. Outside, Birchwood Lane did its ordinary Saturday afternoon, and the mountains sat where they always sat, patient and enormous and indifferent to the small warm light of a house where 4 people were finding their way toward something. None of them had a name for yet, in the particular slow and ordinary way that real things were found not all at once, perfectly, but piece by piece, afternoon by afternoon, 1 cup of coffee and 1 taxonomic argument at a time. February came in cold and stayed that way. Lily turned 9 on the 14th, which was a Saturday, and she had requested, with the specificity that characterized most of her requests, a small gathering rather than a party, because parties involved activities organized by adults, and she preferred to organize her own activities. The distinction was important to her. Grant had learned not to question distinctions that were important to her. Sophie came, which required Vivienne driving up from Denver on a Friday night and staying at the only bed and breakfast in Millhaven that was open in February, which was a Victorian house on Elm Street run retired schoolteacher named Margaret, who made exceptional cinnamon rolls and had opinions about thread count. Vivienne reported the cinnamon rolls positively and the thread count adequately. Grant did not ask for further details. The gathering was 4 children from Lily's class, Sophie and Carol, who had been grandfathered in as an honorary attendee because Lily said it would hurt her feelings not to invite her, which was the kind of social attentiveness that Lily occasionally displayed, and then immediately denied when anyone pointed it out. Grant made pancakes, because Lily had decided that pancakes were the correct birthday breakfast and that this was not a discussion. He made them in the kitchen while 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds. He corrected himself. Today occupied the living room with a marine biology trivia game that Sophie had researched and printed and laminated with a laminator she had apparently requested access to at her school's library. Vivienne stood at the kitchen counter and drank coffee and watched him flip pancakes with the expression of someone who had stopped trying to look like they weren't watching. You're staring, he said. I'm observing, she said. What's the difference? Staring has no purpose, she said. I'm trying to figure out if you put vanilla in the batter. I do, he said. I knew it. She set her mug down with the satisfaction of a confirmed hypothesis. Sophie always says diner pancakes taste different from home pancakes, and I could never figure out why. It's vanilla. And buttermilk, he said. She looked at him. Do you actually have buttermilk in your refrigerator on a regular basis? Lily likes pancakes, he said, as if this explained it, which it did. From the living room, there was a burst of argument that resolved itself quickly. Sophie's voice, patient and clear, explaining something about bioluminescence to someone who had answered incorrectly, and then a general resumption of noise that indicated the game was continuing. "She's good with kids," Grant said, nodding toward the living room. "She's an only child who's been around adults her whole life," Vivienne said. "She either learns to communicate or she doesn't. She chose to learn." A pause. She was different before the diner. Quieter, more internal. He looked at her over his shoulder. Different how? Vivienne thought about it. She was always serious, but it was the seriousness of a child who was protecting something. Since December, she's more. She paused, finding the right word. Present, like she made a decision about being present, and it stuck. Grant turned back to the pancakes. He understood that kind of decision. The deliberate choosing of presence over the alternative. He'd made it himself, once, in a house on Birchwood Lane, with an 18-month-old who needed him to be in the room rather than somewhere else in his head. "She's going to be okay," he said. "I know," Vivienne said. "I'm starting to actually believe it, which is different from knowing it." He stacked the pancakes and carried them to the table and called Lily, who appeared immediately because she had clearly been monitoring the kitchen situation from the doorway and had been waiting for exactly this development. Yes, he'd intervened. The other children appeared behind her in the particular formation of a group that has identified a leader and is following without discussing it. Sophie came last and looked at the pancakes and then at Grant. "Did you put vanilla in?" she said. He looked at Vivienne. She pointed at him with her coffee mug. "Yes," he said. Sophie looked at Lily. "I told you," she said. "I agreed with you," Lily said, pulling out her chair. "You said you weren't sure." I said I wasn't certain. That's not the same as disagreeing. Lily sat down with the finality of someone closing a procedural matter. "Happy birthday to me," she said. "Can someone pass the syrup?" Carver called in the 3rd week of February. Grant was in the truck, on the way back from the school after dropping Lily off, and he pulled over on a quiet stretch of Route 6 to take it. "It's done," Carver said. "The decision maker, the person who authorized the Millhaven operation and the 2 prior attempts on Ashford Technologies." A pause. "He's in custody. German federal authorities with our cooperation. It took longer than we wanted, because the organizational structure had 3 layers of separation, but the thread you found in the booking system, the Briggs connection, led us up through all of it." Grant watched the mountain on the horizon. It was one of the lower ones, the kind that got snow in November and kept it until April, and it was doing that thing it did in the clear February light, where it looked simultaneously very close and entirely unreachable. "The threat to Sophie Ashford is neutralized," Carver said. "I want to be direct about that. It's not diminished. It's not suppressed. The organization that targeted her no longer has an active directive. People who could resource another attempt are either in custody or have more immediate problems than one American tech executive." "All right," Grant said. "I thought you'd want to know," Carver said. "And I thought Ms. Ashford would want you to hear it at the same time she did, rather than separately." "Have you told her?" "I'm calling her next." A brief pause. "Grant, the curriculum work. Reyes says the first pilot draft is done." "It is," Grant said. "It's good work," Carver said. "I've seen the outline. It's the right approach." He said it simply, without the professional warmth he deployed as a matter of habit. The real version of the compliment. What you built there, the framework for ordinary people in extraordinary moments, that's going to help someone. Probably a lot of someones. Grant looked at the mountain. "That's the idea," he said. "Yeah." A pause. "Okay. I'll let you go." He sat in the truck after Carver hung up and let the news settle. The thread he had found in a booking system on a kitchen table in Millhaven, working through encrypted files while his daughter underlined library books across from him, had unraveled 3 layers of a sophisticated organization and put the person who ordered a 7-year-old girl kidnapped from a Colorado diner into federal custody in Germany. He had not gone to Denver. He had not joined anything. He had sat at a kitchen table with coffee and looked at data the way he'd been trained to look at data, and then he'd written it up and handed it off and come back to logistics spreadsheets and pancake batter and Lily's school pickups. 20%. Reyes had said. 20% of a trained capacity in an ordinary civilian was the difference. He had given them more than 20%. He knew that. But the principle held in both directions. You did not need to be the whole thing to do the necessary thing. You did not need to return entirely to what you were to use what you knew. He had been trying to outrun a version of himself for 6 years, and it had taken a diner and a kidnapping attempt and a 43-page proposal and 2 children arguing about anglerfish to show him that there was no version to outrun. There was just him, the Navy and the loss, and Birchwood Lane and Lily and the kitchen table, all of it together, not sequential but simultaneous. Past and present, but a single ongoing thing. He started the truck and drove home. He called Vivienne that evening. She picked up on the first ring, which was not her usual. She was typically in something when he called, some meeting or transition, and picked up on the second or third. Carver told you, she said. Yes, you okay? A pause. Not the considering kind. The kind where someone is deciding how honest to be. I cried in my office for about 10 minutes, she said, which was not. I don't usually do that. 10 minutes seems reasonable, he said. My assistant knocked on the door and I told her I was on a call. Another pause. I wasn't on a call. I know, he said. You were on a call after. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Yes, a longer silence. It's really over. The I keep testing the sentence. Keeps being true. It's really over, he said. She exhaled. Long and complicated. The way Lily had exhaled on the night of December 14th when he told her Sophie was okay, the specific quality of air leaving a body that has been holding something for a long time. Sophie's school is doing a science affair, she said when she was done with it. Lily's is in April. Sophie wants to do deep-sea bioluminescence, she said. She's asked if Lily wants to collaborate on a joint project. Different schools, same research. He thought about this. 2 science fairs, same data, different presentations. Lily would like that, he said. I thought so. A pause. I'd like to be there. For Lily's fair. If that's not, you should come, he said. Okay. The word landed quietly and stayed. Grant. Yeah, I keep thinking about what you said. In the parking lot. She paused. About finding out what it could be. He waited. I know it's complicated, she said. The distance, the schedules, the girls, your work, my work. I'm not asking you to solve it all at once. I'm just asking if you still mean it. He looked at the kitchen. The mismatched mugs, the refrigerator drawings, the slightly wrong chair. The house that had been 2 people for 6 years, and had, in the past 2 months, gotten used to the occasional presence of 4. I still mean it, he said. Good, she said. Because Sophie has already told Lily that she's going to need to stay over during spring break so they can finish the research phase. And at this point, I think we're just following their schedule anyway. We've been following their schedule since January, Grant said. Since December, Vivienne said. Lily sat down next to Sophie in that kitchen. It seems meaned. We were following their lead before we knew there was a lead to follow. He thought about Lily, finding Sophie in the chaos of that night, and simply sitting down beside her. Because anyone told her to. Nope, because it was safe or practical, or the obvious thing to do. Because it was the right thing, and Lily had always had an instinct for right things that ran ahead of her age and her experience, and most of her stated opinions on social interaction. Rachel's instinct living on. Yeah, he said. We were. The first pilot session of the crisis preparedness curriculum ran on a Wednesday in early March in the gymnasium of Millhaven Elementary School with 43 teachers and staff members who had been asked to participate and had, with only 2 exceptions, agreed. Grant stood at the front of the room and looked at the middle-aged women who ran kindergarten classes and coached after-school reading programs and organized the holiday pageants. Young men who taught PE and science and had never thought about what they would do if the day went wrong. And he felt for a moment the familiar specific discomfort of being visible in a way he had spent years avoiding. He pushed through it. I'm going to start with something that's not comfortable to hear, he said. Most of you, if something happened in this building today, would freeze. Because you're cowards. Nope, because you don't care about these kids. Because you have no framework for it. Your brain goes blank when there's no script, and there's no shame in that. It's just how human minds work. He paused. What we're going to do today is start building that script. A perfect one. Not a military one. One that works for who you are and where you are. The room was very quiet. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for the next slide, but the attentive quiet of people who recognized that what was being said was real. Reyes was in the back of the room. Yes, he'd in room leaning against the wall, with her arms crossed and her expression neutral. She caught his eye briefly and nodded once. He thought about Diane reaching for the cast iron skillet. He thought about the man in the booth who had nodded at him from the floor. He'd intervened. He thought about the mother of 3 children who had bumped the chair and then kept moving when he pointed. 40%, he thought. Maybe 30. Maybe just the gap between total blankness and one decision made in the right direction. It was enough. Let's start with exits, he said. Right now, without looking around, I want everyone to tell me, how many exits does this gymnasium have? The room shifted. People's eyes moved involuntarily. He watched them, the small internal effort of noticing what was already there, always there, and had never been counted before. This was where it started. Not with heroism, not with special knowledge, with the simple, ordinary discipline of paying attention to the room you were already in. Yes, intervened. Lily came home from school the day of the pilot session and found Grant at the kitchen table with his notes and a cold cup of coffee, doing the assessment that Ray's had asked him to complete on each session's effectiveness. He had 3 pages of observations, small and specific, the participants who engaged immediately, the 2 who went quiet when he described the scenario portion, the woman who raised her hand and asked a question that was better than most of the questions he'd planned to address. How did it go? Lily said, dropping her backpack by the door. I think, he said. Different from what I expected. Or worse. He thought about it honestly. Both, he said. The hard parts were harder. The other parts were more. She got herself a glass of water and came to sit across from him, which was their usual position, the kitchen table as the center of gravity for every conversation that mattered in this house. She looked at his notes without reading them, giving them the respectful attention of someone acknowledging work without intruding on it. Were they scared? She said. The people you taught. Some of them, he said, the scenario portion. It's uncomfortable thinking through things like that. You need to think through them, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, she turned her water glass in a slow circle. Marcus asked me about you today, she said. Marcus from the volcano? The same. His older sister was at the pilot session. She texted him during it. Lily looked up. He said his sister said there was a guy from the diner who was teaching it. He asked me if that was you. Grant looked at his notes. What did you say? I said yes. She paused. He said his sister said it was really good, that she felt like she learned something real. She looked at him steadily. I told him that's because it was real. He looked at his daughter, 9 years old, sitting across the kitchen table with a water glass, and the particular quality of someone who has thought about something longer than you realized and has decided to tell you what they think. You doing okay with all of this? He said. The program, the visibility, all of it. She considered it seriously. I think, she said slowly, that you spent a long time being invisible because you thought it would keep us safe. And it did. But I think the invisible thing was also, I think it cost you something. He said nothing. I don't know what it's like, she said carefully, to be you. I know some things from what you've told me, but not all of it. She met his eyes. I just think the invisible part was harder for you than you let me see. I think this is better. Grant looked at his 9-year-old daughter and thought about all the things he had tried to protect her from and all the things she had seen clearly anyway. The fact that she sat under a booth table in silence for 40 minutes on a December night and then asked first whether the other girl was okay. And he thought about the word that Rachel used to use for moments like this, the word for when something small stopped you completely. He didn't say any of that. He said, when did you get so smart? I have always been this smart, Lily said, with complete sincerity. You just notice it more now. He reached across the table and pushed her water glass slightly closer to her, which was the small physical language they had for things that didn't need words, and she ran her hands around it and let it sit. Yes, he'd intervened, and they were quiet for a moment in the warm kitchen, in the way they had been quiet together for 6 years, companionable, unhurried, 2 people who knew each other well enough to share silence without filling it. The Silver Pine Diner on the first Friday in April was the same diner it had always been, except that the corner booth near the rear had a new table. The front door hung perfectly, and the canyon red vinyl was exactly the color Diane had specified. Grant and Lily were in their usual booth, the right one, the one with the patched seat and the slightly crooked landscape painting when Vivienne and Sophie came through the door at 6:15, 15 minutes later than they had said, because Vivienne had hit traffic on Route 9 and texted ahead with the specific detail of the delay and her estimated arrival, which was exactly the kind of person she was. Sophie came in looking for Lily the way she always did now, directly, without scanning the room, because she already knew which booth. She slid in beside Lily without ceremony and said, "Immediately, I reclassified the Hemantolophidae." Lily said, "You sent me the updated chart." "I sent it at 11:30 at night." "I was awake," Lily said without further explanation, and Grant decided that the question of what Lily was doing awake at 11:30 on a Tuesday was a battle for another day. Vivienne sat across from him and looked at the menu she didn't need and set it down. She had driven 3 hours from Denver on a Friday afternoon for dinner at a diner in Millhaven, and she looked exactly like someone who had done that and considered it a reasonable use of her time. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. Diane appeared and looked at the four of them with the satisfaction of someone whose canyon-red booth seats had turned out to be entirely worth the trouble. "The usual for you two," she said to Grant and Lily. He'd intervened. "And for you ladies." Sophie ordered hot chocolate with the confidence of some who expected it to be granted, and Vivienne looked at Grant with the expression of someone checking whether hot chocolate was going to be contested, and he looked at Diane and said, "Hot chocolate for her. Whatever Ms. Ashford wants." "Coffee," Vivienne said. "Black. I'll get those," Diane said, and moved away with the practiced efficiency of 20 years behind a counter. Grant looked at Vivienne. She was watching the girls who had produced a shared notebook from Sophie's bag, the joint science fair research that had been running since February, dense with Lily's precise handwriting and Sophie's detailed pencil illustrations, and were comparing notes with the focused seriousness of people who had important work to do. "The Denver board meeting," he said. "How did it go?" "Long," she said. "Productive. They approved the technology licensing restrictions, which means the system stays where it was designed to stay." She said it with the simplicity of someone who has fought for something until the fight was done and no longer needs to describe the fighting. "It's protected. Good," he said. "Yes," she looked at him. "The crisis curriculum. Reyes told me the second pilot is scheduled. 2 weeks," he said. "Parker County this time. Larger group. Reyes is running the law enforcement integration portion herself. She sent me the assessment from the first session." Vivienne paused. "The woman who asked the question. The one you wrote up in your notes." "Mrs. Calloway," he said. "3rd grade. 22 years in. She emailed the program," Vivienne said. "She said the pilot changed how she thought about her classroom. That she walked back in the next morning and looked at it differently, the exits, the space, the kids. She said she'd never thought about it as something she was responsible for understanding before." Grant thought about Mrs. Calloway, early 50s, the kind of tired that was specific to people who had been genuinely caring about other people's children for a very long time, who had raised her hand and asked, "What if I do it wrong? What if I try and it makes things worse?" And he had said, "Doing something gives someone else a framework to respond to. Nothing gives them nothing. You don't have to be right. You have to be moving." She had written it down. "That's one person," Grant said. "That's one person who teaches 22 children a year," Vivienne said. "For however many years she has left." She held his gaze. "That's how it works. That's how it always works. One person at a time until it's enough people." He looked at the table. He thought about the 43 people in the gymnasium on that Wednesday morning, and the Parker County session in 2 weeks, and the 3 school districts in the pilot program, and the revision cycles after that. He thought about the 43-page proposal with Reyes's name on the author credit, and Vivienne's initial, and the way it had looked on his kitchen table next to Lily's ocean geology book on a December morning. He thought about a quiet man in a corner booth who had set down his coffee cup when the door opened and counted the guns. 20% was enough, if enough people had it. "Okay," he said. "Yeah." Vivienne smiled, not the careful version. The real one, unguarded, slightly lopsided on the left, because that was just how her face worked when she wasn't managing it. He had learned to recognize that version as the one that meant something. Diane came back with the coffees and the hot chocolate and a basket of sweet potato fry cedar that no one had ordered, set it in the center of the table with the air of someone exercising benevolent authority, and left without comment. Sophie pulled the basket toward her and tried one, and looked at Lily. "These are good," Sophie said. "I know." Lily said. I've always known that. You said they tasted wrong. I said they tasted like sweet potatoes, Lily said, taking one. That's true. They do taste like sweet potatoes. But that doesn't mean they're not good. Both things can be true. Sophie considered this with the thoroughness she brought to taxonomy and reclassification, and most things that mattered. That's actually correct, she said. It usually is, Lily said. Vivienne caught Grant's eye across the table, and there was something in it that was past amusement, past warmth, something that was just the recognition of a shared life. Still very new, still finding its shape, but present and real, and moving forward one ordinary moment at a time. He thought about what he had told Lily the night of December 14th, the words he'd mouthed to her in the dark beneath the booth before he got up and did the thing that changed the year. Before he became visible again after 6 years of choosing not to be. Trust me, stay here, I will come back. He had come back. Not just that night, he had kept coming back to the kitchen table and school pickup and sweet potato fries and the Friday nights and all of it. The small and ordinary and uncelebrated infrastructure of a life being built inside the limits of what one person could hold. The difference was that the limits were larger now, because he had become something different. Because he had stopped fighting what he already was not a lesson that arrived neatly or all at once. It came in pieces in a 9-year-old's voice saying, "You can stop being quite so careful now," in a detective writing down special warfare operator, without flinching, 43-page proposal that used the word protect the way he understood it to mean. In a woman who said okay in a parking lot in January and meant it and kept meaning it. The diner was warm, the coffee was good. Outside on Main Street, Millhaven did what it always did, moved quietly through its evening. Unhurried, the mountains, sitting where they always sat, enormous and patient, and entirely indifferent to the small warm light from the Silver Pines windows. Lily reached across the table and took another sweet potato fry. She looked at her father with the particular directness she had been using her whole life to say the things that she hadn't found words for yet. "Good Friday," she said. He looked at his daughter and at the woman across the table and at Sophie bent over the research notebook with her hot chocolate going slowly cold because she had forgotten it in favor of a diagram, and at the canyon red booth seats and the pine-paneled walls and the crookedly hung landscape painting that had survived everything. "Yeah," Grant Halden said. "It is."